Yes, thank you very much, Amaranta, for this technical guidance. I wish everyone a warm welcome to day 2 of our International Policy Forum. I think we had yesterday an exciting first day with keynote speeches, interesting insights into micro-credentials, but then also a first panel on diverse entry pathways. So today we are looking forward to another exciting day with 2 panels, one on technology, which will be guided by our colleague Nina Arnhold from the World Bank, and another one on flexibility for via credit transfer, which will be guided by Francisco Marmelejo from the Carter Foundation. So looking forward to an exciting day 2, and I pass it to Nina.
Thank you very much, Michaela, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, depending where you are in the world. And it's an honor for me to be a moderator for this exciting session on the role of technology in supporting flexibility in higher education. And it is one of these topics where maybe in the past we considered the if, but the pandemic has once more focused our attention on this topic. And the question is really how we go about it, how we go about technology supported, excuse me, flexible higher education. I'm a global lead for tertiary education with the World Bank. I will be the moderator for this session. One of my tasks is going to keep the time, to make sure that we stay on time. And I'm going to introduce our speakers as we go along, as we go through the session. So just to repeat that we are looking forward to your questions, and there are 2 ways of sending us questions. One is via the chat function, and one is for participants to do this directly, in which case we would kindly ask you to raise your hand. That's it from my side for now, and we will kick off today's session with Uliana Furev from IIEP. Uliana is an associate project officer with the R&D team, and she contributes to research activities in the area of higher education policy making, planning and management, and external quality assurance. But now Uliana is going to give us a bit of the international background on our topic today. Uliana, over to you.
Thank you, Nina, and dear participants, welcome to panel 2 and this presentation on the international perspective on technology-enhanced learning. One of the dimensions that IEP research looked at is how the technology-enhanced approaches to learning facilitate flexibility during studies. So for a long time, open, online, and distance education was predominantly a feature of open or dual mode universities, offering online and blended higher education to only a few. But now this mode of delivery of learning is providing access to higher education for millions of learners worldwide. During the COVID-19 pandemic, digital learning has become a key strategy to deliver higher education. While our research was conducted prior to the pandemic, it has valuable insights in the current context as well. So in this presentation, I will specifically discuss what we have learned in our research on open online and distance learning and MOOCs platforms. I will also raise the issue of quality assurance of technology-enhanced learning, as well as the importance of it for disadvantaged students. I will close my presentation with some main issue points. So, in which way can technology support flexible learning? Well, first, let us consider what flexible learning means. It is understood as the process of learning that is free from the constraints of time, place, and pace, where a learner can choose the entry and exit points, learning activities, assessment modes, and educational resources. A learner can choose the how, where, when, and what of learning through different means. Technology-enhanced learning, flexible pedagogical approaches, flexible institutional structures, and more. If used effectively, technology can enable this flexibility in time, place, pace, and means of learning. So before the pandemic in 2019, we completed an international survey where we asked ministries of education and higher education of UNESCO member states what modes of delivery of higher education they used in their higher education systems. Most of the responding countries, that is 78%, mentioned that they have been already offering distance, open and online education prior to COVID-19. Although the quality and validation of such delivery modes was mentioned to still be a challenge. Countries combined face-to-face provision and elements of distance and online learning to better provide flexibility to a wide range of learners. Certainly, as we all know, the use of open online and distance learning during the pandemic has drastically increased. And in many education programs, it has become the only means of delivery of learning. Excuse me. So open online and distance learning, which heavily relies on the use of the internet, digital platforms, and other tools, has a number of benefits for learners. It enables flexibility in terms of location of learning and pace of study, as mentioned before. It therefore allows to expand access to education and enables continuous learning opportunities for reskilling or further study for diverse types of students. Open universities, usually these are single-mode institutions, facilitate open and distance learning programs. But they can also be facilitated by regular institutions or dual-mode institutions that provide both face-to-face programs and open and distance learning programs. From our research at IIEP, we learned that India has a strong policy framework that has favored the development of open online and distance learning programs through its open universities. India offered distance education as a major alternative mode of delivery long before the arrival of COVID-19. The country has more than 15 open universities and 110 dual mode universities, which provide education through online and distance modes. During the period of COVID-19 outbreak, the government has allowed top 100 India's higher education institutions to provide fully online degrees. More recently, India has developed online massive open courses, course platform, which is called Swayam, or Study Webs of Active Learning for Young Aspiring Minds. The platform aims to provide access to MOOCs and other e-learning content developed by various education providers. An important aspect of MOOCs hosted on the Swayam platform is their potential to receive recognition by higher education institutions. Under current provisions, a student entering a higher education study program in a university can transfer up to 20% of credits from relevant online courses completed on Swayam, something that one could imagine being a useful model for other countries to follow in current circumstances. Within the context of the sanitary crisis, such platforms can be accessed immediately so that learning continues and is recognized when credits are issued through MOOC platforms. We will hear more about this exciting initiative in our panel later. Another good practice that we would like to highlight comes from the United Kingdom. In 2012, the Open University, which has specialized in open and distance learning for many years, in collaboration with 170 British and international partners, has created the FutureLearn platform. This is also a MOOCs platform, which provides short courses, online degrees, and MicroCredentials. FutureLearn has 13 million people signed up worldwide. It uses design, technology, and partnerships to create flexible online courses, as well as undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. There have been approximately 3,000 online short courses on the FutureLearn platform since it has been launched, with 620 short courses available to start as of June 2020. We will hear more about this exciting platform as well during the panel presentation later. But in many countries, open online distance learning programs are still not recognized at the same level as face-to-face ones. In our research, we found that quality assurance mechanism can support the implementation of open and distance learning programs, MOOCs, and other modes of technology-enhanced learning and ensure their quality. Through different mechanisms, quality assurance provides trust in the online program providers, not only to students, but also to other higher education providers. It can be done through guidance on accrediting online and distance education providers, or through the Memorandum of Understanding on online and blended learning. In fact, there are countries, as we've heard in our research, as we've heard in our panel yesterday, such as Malaysia, that have got prescriptive guidelines on the implementation of MOOCs, ODL, and micro-credentials for higher education institutions. The implementation of these instruments is also assessed by the Malaysian Qualifications Authority. Technology-based solutions to deliver learning can be used to respond to the demands of diverse students for lifelong learning, upskilling or reskilling, or even further study. Technology can support student-centered learning that is more reactive to the needs of disadvantaged learners. It can enable working adults, students with disabilities or caring responsibilities, females, students in remote areas, and persons who cannot physically go to class to pursue their degrees. Good practice comes from South Africa, where in 2018, females enrolled more in open online distance learning programs, that was 66%, than in traditional face-to-face programs, that was 54%. In the UK, the Open University, which only provides open online and distance courses, attracted 27,000 disabled students in 2020 only. These are just some of the few examples in which technology can assist less advantaged learners. But of course, we should not forget about the inequalities and inequities surrounding digital infrastructure. In many higher education systems, students still lack access to online higher education, either due to poor internet connectivity or lack of digital infrastructure. So to conclude, independent of the COVID-19 pandemic, it can be observed that new ways of learning and acquiring skills already engage millions of learners worldwide. Open online distance learning can empower students by offering them choices in how, what, when, and where they learn. However, its implementation requires a balance of student-centered, institutional, and national approaches that are economically viable and appropriately manageable for institutions and students. It requires solid instructional designs which go beyond remote teaching and learning. Open online and distance learning has become the main mode of delivery of learning during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is here to stay. ODL needs to be fully recognized and therefore quality assured, the same as face-to-face programs. So defining flexible quality standards for it is indispensable. There is a need for a coordinated approach between institutions, governments, and quality assurance agencies to address the issue of quality standards for technologically enhanced approaches to learning. And I would like to stop here and conclude my presentation. I would like to draw your attention to the resources that are available for you on our webpage, also which have been sent to you in the welcome package. You can learn more about various topics being discussed at the forum by consulting the background paper, country notes, country case studies, and more, which are all available on our webpage. Thank you for your time and attention, and I wish you an enjoyable rest of the panel. And now I pass it on to Nina.
Thank you very much, Uliana, for kicking us off so well and providing an excellent framework for the presentations to come. With this, I'm going to introduce Dr. Garima Malik, who is an assistant professor at the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education at NIEPA, the National Institute for Educational Planning and Administration in India. Dr. Malik holds a PhD in economics from Ohio State University in the US. And before joining NIEPA, she was an assistant professor of economics at the University of Delhi and a fellow at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Research. Dr. Malik, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Arnold. Thank you very much. And I hope the presentation is can be viewed.
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, thank you. So my presentation, as described, is on online and distance learning in India. This is a component of the flexible learning pathways in higher education in India case study, which was part of the SDG 4 project on planning for flexible learning pathways in 8 case study countries. And I did this jointly with Professor Narayanan Annalakshmi. And I will be making the presentation, but I will invite her to come in during the question and answer session as well. So just to look at the higher education context, India has the second largest higher education system in the world. And with 993 universities, over 40,000 colleges and 10,000 standalone institutions, we have moved from a stage of elitism at the time of independence to a stage of massification with a gross enrollment ratio of 26.3. Of course, the National Education Policy 2020 now aims at making the gross enrollment ratio 50% by 2035. That is the aim that the government has. And there is also a large and growing role of the private sector. So the private sector is growing, and we have a large public sector, but there is also a large role of the private sector, and we have 385 privately managed universities and over 77.8% colleges in the private sector. So that is the higher education context within which this study is placed. Now, going to the evolution of distance education and technology in distance education, giving a slight historical background. The distance learning in India for higher education was initiated in the form of correspondence courses in 1962. And it started with Delhi University establishing a school of correspondence courses and continuing education in 1962. And in fact, the establishment of Open University in the United Kingdom also encouraged India. And the Andhra Pradesh government gave a lead to the country by setting up the first university. So the first Open University was actually set up at a state level at Hyderabad in 1982. And then following that in 1985, the government of India established the Indira Gandhi National Open University. India has 18 open universities, one central and the other state open universities, and over 220 dual mode institutions offering distance education programs. And distance education went through a major change after, I would say, 4 different types of technology. One is the arrival of the radio, then the television, then the computers, and the internet. So if we see the evolution of online and distance education and national policies, the National Policy on Education 1968 stressed on part-time and correspondence courses at the university level, according to them the same status as full-time education. And the National Policy on Education 1986 expanded the open university system with IGNOU, which I just described, which had been created. It had a major thrust on adult education, lifelong learning, open and distance learning. The policy also had a major focus on improving access for equity groups. And now the more recent National Policy on Education 2020, which has been launched at the time of the pandemic, has been, but the draft policy was available earlier, but the policy itself was launched in 2020, has been important for promoting the development of open and distance learning programs and online courses. It's a major step in advancing flexible learning pathways in Indian higher education with liberal education, autonomous, multidisciplinary institutions, credit transfers, and multiple entry and exit options. So if you look at open and distance learning and we see the enrollment, as the demand for higher education has surpassed the institutional capacity for education, distance education emerged as an alternative. Enrollment in distance education has grown rapidly to 3.9 million in 2019. It now accounts for 11% of all higher education enrollment. And out of that, we have 2 billion students who enrolled in undergraduate programs and 1 million in postgraduate programs. So the majority of the enrollment is in the undergraduate programs, but it's lesser than what is there in the conventional programs, if we compare. But as you can see in the graph that the total enrollment is going up. In 1991, the Distance Education Council was established and then replaced by the Distance Education Bureau attached to the University Grants Commission. As far as the financing of distance education programs is concerned, the open universities have been successful in mobilizing funds from non-government sources, that is student fees and receipts from publications. The major difference in expenditure pattern between open universities and conventional universities is in terms of the salary component. So when we say student fees, it's not that the student fees are increasing, but the enrollment has been increasing, and therefore they have the majority of the funds are actually coming from the fees. If we look at the comparative enrollment trend of Indira Gandhi National Open University in terms of the social category and area of learning, we see that the open universities have played an important role in promoting equity and access to higher education. And at IGNOU, the disadvantaged groups have actually increased in enrollment numbers, particularly for the scheduled caste and the other backward castes. The same is true for the enrollment in the rural areas. However, tribal areas still need more, as you can see from the graph, tribal areas still need more access to distance learning opportunities. So in a sense, it has been very effective in terms of social justice and in terms of increasing access to higher education. So coming to the online education, as Uliana talked about SWAYAM. So I'll just say that SWAYAM is the Study Webs of Active Learning for Young Aspiring Minds, is the Indian massive open online course platform launched by the Ministry of Education, which was then the Ministry of Human Resource Development. And institutions can now allow up to, well, in response to the pandemic, the latest regulations say that the percentage has been increased to 40%. So you can take up to 40% of courses for credit from the SWAYAM platform, and it is actually free. The SWAYAM platform gives courses free, but there's a slight charge if you want a certificate at the end of it. And NPTEL is for engineering. It's one of the 8 national coordinators of SWAYAM. It is a joint initiative of IITs and Indian Institute of Science funded by the Ministry of Education, which through information communication technology provides e-learning in engineering, science, and humanities streams. So if you look at the empirical evidence at the national and the institutional level for this study on flexible learning pathways, we looked at the national level picture as well as the 2 case study institutions of IIT Delhi, which is a technical institution, and Bharatiyar University, which is an arts and science university. And the interviews were conducted, and some of the focus group discussions actually took place with students from the School of Distance Learning, which is there in the Bharatiyar University, which is a state university. So if we look at the enablers and the challenges which have come out for the implementation of the online and distance learning, we can see that we have the policy framework and regulation. So policy framework and regulation has been an important enabler in terms of the implementation of the open online and distance learning. So it's not just the policies, but it's also the implementation of these various policies. The funding provision for online and distance learning programs, graded autonomy. So we have the different categories of graded autonomy. We have category 1, category 2, category 3. And if you are above 3.5 on the NAAC grading scale, then you are accorded category 1 autonomy. So that is an understanding that the government has, that universities should be only given autonomy based on their performance and not necessarily something that everybody gets the same level of autonomy. Accreditation of online and distance learning programs. So in India, open universities are also accredited in the same way as the regular and conventional universities. Leadership and management, reachability of online and distance learning programs, and flexibility in learning. However, on the other side, if we look at the challenges, we find that over-regulation of less autonomous higher education institutions is an issue. Restriction of distance learning centers beyond higher education institutional jurisdiction. That is for the state, and there is a difference between this, how the central universities and the state universities have learning centers. And that is something which is different for both central and state universities. And Bharatiyar University, being a state university, which was in our sample, actually cannot have learning centers beyond the higher education institutional jurisdiction, according to the University Grants Commission regulations. Administrative fragmentation. So there is administrative fragmentation in terms of the multiplicity of regulatory authorities which are present. Lack of adequate infrastructure and proper training of faculty. That is something which is very important. Language of ODL programs. People have problems with the English language, and that turns out to be actually a source of inequality. So in fact, what is important is to have it in multiple languages, including the regional languages. And the National Education Policy 2020 talks a lot about the regional languages and how, so ODL programs have to be in regional languages as well as the English language, so that there can be easier access and people can understand the courses. Perception of ODL as of lower quality. That is another issue of ODL being perceived as of lower quality than the conventional and the traditional degree programs. So some of the key recommendations for enhancing the online and distance education programs in India are in terms of the training of faculty. That's very important. The faculty needs to be trained and to be made to actually adjust to the new dimensions in terms of the online and distance education programs. Enhance the reachability of ODL and online programs. Like I showed that in some of the areas, some of the disadvantaged areas, we still don't have access to distance and online programs because of lack of electricity, lack of other kinds of technology. And so there is some kind what we often hear about as the digital divide in India. Flexibility in admission, that is something very important, that it is important to give recognition to prior learning and to also give different kinds of flexibilities in admission requirements. In terms of the cost reduction, that is an element. Without bringing down the quality, it is possible to have lower fees in order to enhance the online and distance education. SWAYAM is of course free, but for the distance education programs, especially the professional programs, there's a cost attached to it. And then the language of ODL and online programs. So governance concerns and implementation of online and distance learning and the way forward. The challenges in governance are not only concerned with transforming manual systems into ICT-enabled processes, it also involves deepening the work culture along with ensuring responsiveness towards marginalized students and facilitating a learning environment. So some of the governance concerns are in terms of the accreditation, in terms of the funding, and in terms of the regulation. So those are some of the concerns. Improving the institutional governance by ensuring student support services, which also Uliana talked about in terms of the student support, and the ICT-based learning processes and the grievance redressal mechanisms. So the National Education Policy 2020 aims at preparing norms, standards, and guidelines for systemic development, regulation, and accreditation of ODL, and a framework for quality of ODL that will be recommendatory for all higher education institutions. So in fact, we had some interviews with the Chambers of Commerce, which is the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, where we talked about the employment aspect of flexible learning pathways and students who go through a distance education program and online degree programs, and what is the employment prospects for that. And while we didn't have access to the data, but in fact, they said that there should be closer academic industry linkages. Universities will offer PhD and master's program in core areas. This is according to the NEP 2020, such as machine learning, as well as multidisciplinary fields, artificial intelligence, and plus professional areas like healthcare, agriculture, and law. And they may also develop and disseminate courses in these areas via platforms such as SWAYAM. So these are some of the governance concerns in terms of implementation of online and distance learning and what we see as the way forward. And some of the issues that came up in the course of online and distance learning, which was a component of our larger project on flexible learning pathways for Indian higher education. So this is the contact information for me and for Professor Anna Lakshmi, and I look forward to the Q&A session. So thank you very much, Dr. Anand.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malik, for this very informative talk. And I'm sure many of us have questions also because of the huge ambition of the national education policy in India. So we are curious also to hear how this will be reflected in open and distance learning. For now, we move on to our next presentation, but I'm sure we will come back to many of the points in our discussion. And I'm delighted to introduce Professor John Breen, who is an emeritus professor of higher education research at the Open University in the UK, a visiting professor at the London School of Economics and at the University of Bath. And for nearly 20 years, he has directed the Center for Higher Education Research and Information at the Open University, where he has led and participated in projects amongst other topics on graduate employment, quality assurance, and on the academic profession. Professor Breen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello, everybody. Given that this is a session which is about technology, I have to confess that my technology limitations mean that I'm dependent on Uliana to present the slides. So perhaps if we could start by moving on to the first one, Uliana, because I want to just set my presentation in the wider context of the UK higher education system. The first thing to mention is, in fact, one of the challenges for the project is that UK higher education has got 4 national systems, for England, for Scotland, for Wales, and for Northern Ireland. It was certainly beyond my capacity to do 4 projects about flexible learning pathways. They have certain things in common, but on the whole, what I've been doing focused on the English system. There are figures over there for you. We've got over 2 million students, over 130 universities, and considerable diversity in terms of when, where, what, why, and how students study. Students pay considerable fees. And I think the other point about the competitive marketized system is that in many respects, policy is to effectively sort of see the students as the consumers, and actually a priority for higher education is to bring the students through the door, because that brings the money through the door as well. So one of the I think characteristics of the UK system is the autonomy of institutions in relation to the state. That leads them to some extent to be running as businesses. But I think the other thing to observe about the context is the considerable hierarchy. We have league tables and rankings of different universities, and there is an emphasis on universities being better than other universities, and perhaps less emphasis on them being different. Let's move on then to the next slide about the focus of the UK study. Spent some time looking at mainly the English national system, I have to say. We've collected or looked at existing national student data about the system. But I think the main focus really was on the 4 case studies that we looked at. We will focus in a moment on the Open University and FutureLearn, but very briefly, and this is a point about diversity, the 4 institutions were selected for the project because they were all regarded as being quite innovative and focused on flexible learning pathways. But I think it's interesting to observe that it was in a way approached quite differently in the different institutions. So in Birmingham, there was considerable flexibility over curriculum about what students could combine with what subjects could be linked together. And so in many respects, students had a flexibility to construct degrees as they wanted to, although the university gave them considerable support in doing that. University of Exeter had academic partnerships, part-time study, degree apprenticeships. Teesside University, considerable lifelong learning, large numbers of older adult students, considerable amount of part-time study, degree apprenticeships, and then the Open University, of course, online online learning. I would just observe, though, that actually all 4 universities were providing online learning, and of course, as we've already heard, and we all know, this was derived from the pandemic. Interesting questions, though, about whether it will disappear with the pandemic. And I would just throw out small recent information. One of our largest and traditional universities, the University of Manchester, last week announced that online learning would be a permanent fixture at the university, that lectures would now become online, and face-to-face teaching would still be there, but for the smaller groups. So that is interesting. The other thing to say about that is that over 3,000 of Manchester University students have signed a petition objecting to this to the online teaching. So there's a lot happening everywhere at the moment, but the focus for me now is to tell you a little bit about Open University and FutureLearn. So if we now move on to the next slide. Open University has been around for over 50 years, with part-time students today studying online, but just to observe historically how technology changes, in its opening decades, Open University courses were made available on television. The BBC provided lectures, and so essentially anybody could be watching the Open University lectures. If you were an Open University student, you would get books, you would get reports as well. So there you see online education was preceded by distance education, and as in the presentation, it can be local. Increasingly, it can be global. So moving on to FutureLearn specifically with the next slide. This was set up in 2012 by the Open University, but is now co-owned with an Australian-based international company called Seek Limited. Seek Limited basically is a international company that focuses on employability and helping people change jobs, employers recruiting. But as you can see, the FutureLearn is effectively global. There's people can take degrees, but also short courses, micro-credentials, but it is all delivered online. Students may or may not get qualifications, mainly because a lot of them don't need qualifications. They are perhaps returning to higher education, having already acquired the qualifications they're needing. They are updating, reskilling, and so on. And indeed, for quite a lot of the courses, there's a lot that is there for free. And in fact, where there are fees charged, it is often for getting the credential or the certificate rather than actually the learning process itself. And just to indicate the increase, because I think earlier, I mean, when Nina introduced it, I think there was a reference to the 13 million. And in my report recently, you know, that was the figure I got. But it seems like in a few months, it's jumped another 3 million. So when we've now got 16 million students worldwide, of course. I will say a bit more about the students later, but let me now move on, you know, to actually what FutureLearn is providing. So could we move on to the next slide? And essentially, it divides into online degrees, micro-credentials, expert tracks, short courses. I'll go into each of these in a few minutes. But there is flexibility within all of them, and there can also be movement around all of them, because students can study for micro-credentials, but when you get enough of them, and if you've been getting certificates for them, it can be possible to convert it all into a degree at some stage. So let me move on to the next slide, just to give you some examples of degrees that are available from FutureLearn, from a range of courses, a range of universities, and you can get degrees from the universities that listed there. These are just some examples, and I would certainly advise people who are interested to look into the FutureLearn website, because there is so much happening at FutureLearn that it was quite beyond the scope to show you all of it. So everything I'll be giving you will be of examples. Just returning though to a general point about the student experience of FutureLearn, the following slide summarizes this, and with comments from students. I should just mention that in creating the slides, I was helped very much by colleagues in IIEP, but I would just observe here that I don't think the faces at the bottom here are real FutureLearn students, because as we will see later on, a typical FutureLearn student is likely to be in their late 30s or early 40s, and not the young students who are here. However, what they are saying, I think, is quite interesting, because whilst we're talking about FutureLearn and online learning, what I think comes out here is the quite broad concept of online, where there are both, you know, social and interactive features of the student experience, even when it's online. So moving on again to the next slide, examples of short courses. And this is where I think this again is interesting. I mean, there's over 1,000 of them again, so website. A range of things. You can learn jazz piano at Goldsmiths College, University of London, or do an introduction to psychology with Monash University. China's role in global travel and tourism. Considerable diversity, but short courses, 3 hours per week for 2 weeks, 3 hours for 6 weeks, varying times from the short courses. So moving on again. FutureLearn pretty much covers all subject fields. And I think one thing to say is that quite a lot of online learning that has been developed, I think more generally, certainly in the UK, tends to have a more kind of employability, vocational focus. Now, an awful lot of FutureLearn does that, but there are other things there as well. The politics and society, you know, for example, history, the literature. So it is a very broad curriculum that is available there. Moving on again, this is just a list of some universities. There's, you know, at the top it's British universities, at the bottom we go around the world, but you need to go into the website, you know, to get the full list of universities, but also to note that there are lots of other organizations that are providing courses from FutureLearn. And we'll see some of them now. If we move on to the next slide, which is looking at what's available from MicroCredentials, and we can link that to yesterday's presentation about the role of MicroCredentials. Within FutureLearn, it is quite a bit of emphasis on work-related, and this is taken, you know, from the website, and again some examples of it: fashion, international relations, learning French, or it could, but there's also learning Spanish. You've got a range of choices. So again, diversity about what is available, and the credentials that can be obtained from them. But again, I would emphasize, have a look on the website, which gives you that information. Let's move on one more slide. This time we're looking at the students. And I think the clear thing from this is that FutureLearn is global. The learners are all over the world. just a quarter of them within the UK. Typical age, I mean, over 70% of them would be between 26 and 65. So it is completely lifelong, global, and a majority are female. So coming on to the next slide, which is pretty much the last slide. My thoughts, and we can, move on to question and answer with some of these things. But is FutureLearn the future for learning generally? And the questions, that I come up with there, it seems that if it is to be the future, then things that need to be, and which FutureLearn is achieving, I think, is for there to be greater collaboration and less competition between individual universities, because within the UK marketized business picture, there has been a strong competitive feature across higher education, and FutureLearn is a nice example of moving towards a more collaborative model. Issues of quality assurance, I think they've already been mentioned today, but I think that is an interesting and quite challenging one, because typically quality assurance has focused on particular courses in particular universities, whereas flexible learning pathways take individuals to be crossing boundaries of institutions, of subjects, of even countries. So can quality assurance capture the quality of the pathways? And equally, information requirements and support requirements, both for learners and for teachers, to have an understanding of the pathways they're traveling on and the destinations they're traveling on, and also giving some students the options of changing pathways if they discover they're heading in the wrong direction. Issues of funding as well, and also, I mean, the issues of what is higher education, and the just some of the examples of what I showed you earlier, raise questions of is FutureLearn redefining higher education, or is a lot of it a broader adult lifelong learning, some of which is higher education, some of it is employment preparation, some of it is just having fun, so there's a lot being provided. Do we want to put it in a higher education bracket, or can we take it more broadly? So those are the things that are, I think, needed to be addressed. Just points about a couple of things. I'm sure there's many more, but a couple of things to avoid. It does seem to me that increasingly we need a diversity across institutions, so not that there can be a danger that to enable students to move between institutions, institutions need to conform in certain ways. Otherwise, it is difficult for the students to move in and out and across the boundaries. And I understand that, but equally, there's we want there to be diversity, but managing that diversity is quite challenging, and I don't think conformity is the answer. And also, of course, the dangers of students getting lost on their pathways and ending up in the wrong place. So I think with the complexity of flexible learning pathways, both online and however one does it, there are some quite important challenges. That's pretty much the last slide. If I could just though finish with a couple of observations. The title for this presentation started with about the local and global. And I do think it's quite interesting when one considers online learning generally. It is, of course, quite easy to be both. You don't need to go away from home to university. The higher education can come to you in your own living room online, but equally, it enables you to go global. You know, I sometimes come to the conclusion about, does geography matter anymore? It doesn't matter where you are. The other comment I wanted to make was, I do wonder whether in online learning and the flexibility that we've been talking about, whether in fact the recognition and certification of learning becomes even more of a challenge than the provision of learning. In other words, you know, knowledge is available kind of everywhere, online, work-based, internet. One can acquire knowledge, but to demonstrate that you have the knowledge can be much more challenging. And I think that relates to quality assurance again as well. And then one last thing, which I'd realized that I had forgotten to mention earlier, which I'll just tap on the end, is that as well as FutureLearn and its 16 million students, the Open University itself runs OpenLearn. And I will just mention that on OpenLearn, there are over 1,000 free short courses. They are branded as Education for Life. And I'll just finish with what Education for Life means, because it's what the Open University feels that we all need. So Education for Life entails skills for work, support for family and relationships, support for health and well-being, and also support to make more money and financing. With that, I will stop.
Thank you very much, Professor Breen, for another excellent presentation. And I will directly go over to our discussant, Dr. Van Suhaynes, who is the Director of the Academic Excellence Division at the Department of Higher Education at the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, where she oversees strategic academic planning and policy development. Her background is in microbiology. That's the area where she holds a PhD. However, she focuses in her current work also on technology-enhanced learning and flexible learning through MOOCs. Dr. Suhaynes, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very well.
Thank you very much. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. It's 7:15 here in Malaysia. Thank you very much again for this opportunity. I strongly believe that technology playing a big role in supporting flexibility in higher education, and technology has the potential to revolutionize the conventional process of teaching and learning. In supporting technology enhancements, recently Malaysia has launched the National Fourth Industrial Revolution Policy, National 4IR policy, which plays a vital role in coordinating all government efforts to ensure that Malaysia is not left behind in the fourth industrial revolution. So the government is focusing on increasing the people's awareness on the need to adapt or to adopt new technologies in tandem with the current development worldwide. And education has been identified as one of the sectors which supporting the socio-economic needs. Meanwhile, in supporting the development of digital education, Ministry of Higher Education Malaysia also has published the Malaysia Education Blueprint in higher education, which emphasizes on globalized online learning. Under Shift 9, we have 10 shifts under this Malaysia Education Blueprint, and on Shift 9 is globalized online learning. And we are also working on the to enhance the implementation of digital education in Malaysia higher, not only to enhance but to emphasize on the digital transformation in the Malaysian higher learning institution. Malaysia too has produced or published the Malaysia Digital Economy Blueprint, as set the direction of the digital economy and built the foundation to drive digitalization across the nation. To be specified, the blueprint is formulated as the action plan to outline the efforts and initiatives which will be implemented up to 2030. As it's known that big data, machine learning, and Internet of Things were the biggest educational technology trends. Now, however, distance learning has become a major trend that rules them all. So definitely the COVID-19 pandemic has extremely changed the way we teach and learn. And ODL is actually open and distance learning is nothing new to Malaysia actually. And we have been implementing ODL even before the pandemic. So our local universities have their own learning management system to support the implementation of ODL in Malaysia. And this was designated for ODL become a repository for a multitude of resources and conduit for other relevant support. And the Malaysia Qualification Agency, which MQA has actually developed a guideline also, Code of Practice for Program Accreditation, called ODL, COPA ODL, specifically to meet the increasing demand of ODL programs offered by full pledge open universities, traditional and dual mode institution in Malaysia. So in the year 2020, our local universities have done a readiness survey on their ODL. So nearly about 67 to 70% students are welcome, with the online learning and teaching and learning. But of course, there are issues reported where, a non-conducive learning environment, increased load in terms of tasks and assignments, different tools and platforms also, and of course, difficulties, certain difficulties in working groups and struggle to manage time and scheduling. But I think over a 1 year, the percentage of the students who are actually able to manage ODL have significantly increased due to initiatives and efforts taken by the Ministry of Higher Education and the respective institutions and stakeholders. So And the universities have actually launched strategic initiative in innovative delivery and assessment, transformative learning in the virtual learning environment. So all these were put in full motion since the pandemic hit. So as mentioned by Juliana just now, that the Malaysian Qualification Agency has published the Malaysian guideline to good practices on micro-credential in July 2020. But earlier in 2016, we also have published the guidelines for the development and delivery of Malaysia MOOCs and guidelines on credit transfer for MOOCs by MQA. And all these are coordinated by the National E-Learning Council and governed by the Ministry of Higher Education. So as per December 2020, we have over about 1,400 MOOCs that have been offered in our local universities. And Malaysia also are offering and developing micro-credential courses. And in as of May 2021, we have about over 300 micro-credential courses offered by the public universities and over 2,000 courses by the private universities. So fundamentally, modern technologies have that ability to change the design of the higher education establishment, and higher education institution need to have that transformation where students will be able to pursue an advanced education. So I would personally think it's not about enrollment anymore. It's about subscription. And as Prof. Brendan just now mentioned that, you know, in globalization and for the students to have access seamlessly. So learners have this opportunity to learn at any time, anywhere, anyhow, at their own pace. And new technologies can actually facilitate this active engagement in learning by perhaps reducing the amount of class time where students, you know, sit passively listening to the lectures. And technologies actually make education smarter and more effective. And of course, we hope that it will actually satisfy the learners' needs more. And besides that, I think I do agree that, you know, technology allows the lecturers to be more creative and innovative in terms of monitoring the learners continuously and to engage the learners more in the virtual learning environments. It is very important that, you know, where now the times needs to be more flexible for everyone, including the policymakers, employers, and institutions, and have that an opportunity to lay the foundation for longer term efforts that increase access to learners from all walks of life. And technology has stepped into the breach, and we will continue to play a key role in educating future generations. So in a world where knowledge is a mouse click away, the role of the educator must change too. And again, on globalization, educating citizens in an interconnected world, and redefining the role of the educator, unlocking technology to deliver education. For example, on-demand tutoring is just the beginning. All right, so we are looking at these opportunities, educational opportunities and resources based on the whole ecosystem. And along the way, students in general found that technology-based learning to fit actually their preferences. So when we relate all these access and necessity to practice in designing ODL or online learning design. So packaging several topics into online learning experience also is very prevalent. And by having, for example, alternative assessment or holistic assessment to match the course outcome, and student found it learning more focused and manageable. And we can see that, you know, traditional in-person classroom learning will be complemented with new learning modalities, and from live broadcast to educational influencers, to virtual reality experiences, all is actually through technology. And learning could be a habit that is actually integrated into daily routine. And I do agree also, we are online learning, ODL, technology-based learning is here to stay. It is actually going to be a true lifestyle. And the shift of in higher education focus to online learning possess challenges, but also offers opportunities for growth and innovation. So what uncommon times call for uncommon thinking. And technology is actually the key in transforming education, and we must be innovative, creative, and proactive. So this ugly pandemic has actually created the possibility for optimism, change, and reform. So it has opened a path to a new world, and it is ours to take that opportunity. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suhaines, for these excellent comments. I see some of the participants raising their hands and their thumbs to support strongly what you just said about the opportunities created by the pandemic. We are going now into the discussion. We have around half an hour for the discussion. Again, if you are directly connected on the Zoom call, please raise your hand for comments or questions. I will try to spot you as quickly as possible, but please bear with me. Also, I see some of the names abbreviated or truncated, so I will try to do a decent job addressing you. But again, I ask for your apologies and patience if I do not always get it right. We also received a couple of excellent comments and questions from the chat. That's also a good option. If you have questions or comments you would like to post via chat, please do so. For now, I do not see raised hands. I quickly check with Uljana that it's not a technical issue, maybe on my side.
There are two. I see.
There are two, so
yeah,
I have a very quick look. Otherwise, I ask for your kind assistance in pointing us to the right participant. Yes, unfortunately, for some reason, I cannot see it.
Yeah,
yet. Michaela, you want to come in? Yeah.
I can see that there are two questions from Suniva Vitaka and then from Gada Muhammad. Would you want to take these questions, Nina?
Yes, absolutely. Let's take these two questions in the order mentioned by you, Michaela. And then going forward, we will also see if we can bundle questions a little bit. And at some point, we will come in with the questions from the chat.
Right. Okay. I think I was first in line. My name is Suniva Whitaker. I'm the rector of the University of Agder in Norway and the leader of Universities Norway. I have a question to both presenters. First of all, I'd like to thank you for very interesting presentations. But could you say a few words about the completion rate among online students, in particular degree-seeking students, compared to traditional students? And a second question is how these degrees are perceived by employers. Are they recognized on a par with degrees from traditional universities with traditional methods of teaching? Thank you.
Who wants to go first? Since this is a question to both of our speakers, and maybe the observations from Malaysia would also be interesting on this. Dr. Malik, do you want to go first?
Yes. So that's a very interesting question about the completion rate. It's not easy to get the actual exact data on the completion rate of online students. So we try to make an effort, but as far as how the degrees are perceived by employers, yes, as far as the perception of employers is concerned, there is a perception that ODL is perceived to be slightly inferior as compared to a traditional program. So that is a perception that they have that may not be rooted in reality. But we have, in fact, judgments by the Supreme Court and legal judgments which say that, in fact, they should be treated at par with conventional programs. So that is as far as that is concerned. And as far as the completion rate of online students is concerned, I can also invite Professor Anna Lakshmi, who is my co-author on this study, if she would like to say anything on that.
Thanks, Garima. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay.
Please go ahead. We can hear you.
We can hear you, Anna.
The question there. Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So that is the data that it was not available with the institution. They have the enrollment, but then some students completed within the 2 years if it's a 2-year program, and some they take 3 years, and some don't even complete. So they don't have a database on the completion. So that was one thing that we were missing, when we were collecting the data. And the second question, I agree with what Dr. Garima said about how the labor market looks at degrees earned through distance mode. There are two types of takers in terms of labor market. One is the government concerns, and the other is private concerns. And as far as government concerns are concerned, they don't treat distance mode degrees as equivalent to those taken on conventional traditional mode. The private companies, however, look at the skill set of the candidate rather than the mode by which they learn. And so they don't really discriminate much between the different modes. That is one thing. And as far as the number of courses and credits are concerned, a student who is earning a degree by distance mode learns lesser number of papers, or courses as compared to someone who does on traditional mode. So the number of credits also, the regular students, they earn credits. It is a choice-based credit system, but for distance education, it is not credit-based. So now the government of India is insisting on bringing the system on par with the conventional, mode of education. So the distance students also earn credits and learn as many courses as a regular student would. When I mean regular student, I mean someone through conventional mode of education. So that transition is taking place, and it's already started. And we are in the university, we are asked to revise the curriculum and restructure the distance, programs, so that gradually in a year or two, we would find exactly same, curriculum and the credits for distance mode as well as the conventional mode. I hope that answers.
Thank you very much for this reflection from India. I quickly hand over to Dr. Breen and to Professor Breen and Dr. Sains, and then we have more incoming questions. So we will take the next set of questions. John, over to you. We cannot hear you at the moment, in which case I would...
Okay, I think you can now. Yeah.
Yes, it's good.
That was a technology challenge, which is always with us. Yeah, a number of points really. And I do think these are interesting questions. I would perhaps just begin with something which I was intending to say, you know, at the end of my presentation. Many years ago, I did a research. Well, I did a research project for one of our national higher education bodies in the UK, and was given this title for it from the body, which was for me to write a report entitled "Things We Know and Don't Know," specifically about graduate employment. But I've always thought since then that in many respects, that's a good title for a lot of things, and things we know and don't know about flexible learning pathways. And it is often, I think, the case that it's the things that we don't know that are actually the more important, particularly if we feel that we need to know them. And I think my response, you know, to the question is in part picking up on the what do we know and what do we not know. A few responses. I mean, Open University students, I think completion rates there are roughly 65% or something like that, you know, complete their degrees. The university has been getting rather anxious about that and has been trying to, I know one of its strategic aims at the moment is to increase completion rates. But, you know, I have a big reservation about that because I think there is also evidence that actually quite a few of the lifetime learners on Open University degrees don't actually want to complete. They're not actually doing the course to get the qualification. They're doing part of the course to get the knowledge or get the skills. In fact, about a third of Open University students doing degrees already have degrees. And in a sense, they may not want additional degrees. Moving to employer perspectives, I do feel in many respects we have difficulties here in terms of what is really being compared. And you know, if we look at this in terms of the lifelong learning, I'm not sure, you know, about recruiting somebody to their first job after finishing their studies is comparable to recruiting somebody who has been working in an area for 20 years or something like that. And indeed, I think we know that employers, you know, are looking for a range of factors, previous experience, qualifications, a whole range of things. So I think it is somewhat, you know, difficult to give straightforward answers, you know, to these questions. And I would actually, you know, categorize it under, in a sense, some of the things that we don't know. But I would agree that these are things that it would be useful to know. And again, it comes into, I think, part of the quality assurance issue. I mean, with a lot of online learning, there is so much flexibility there that, in fact, people are traveling on different pathways to different destinations. And so that, I think, creates a lot of complexity, and actually the challenges of understanding and generalizing about the flexible learning processes is really difficult, you know. And I you know, and there are all sorts of social class factors, ethnicity factors, age factors, you know, that interfere with these processes.
Thank you very much, Professor Breen. I will quickly turn to Malaysia and see if you want to add on this crucial question. Then we take a set of questions from the audience and we'll allocate to the speakers. And then Michaela is going to summarize the questions from the chat for us.
Okay.
Dr. Sohaines, something to add on this point?
Okay, thank you. Very quick one. I think I do agree with Prof. Brennan. Completion rate has been a challenge to all, especially for MOOCs. Quality assurance is very important, and but at the same time, I think in terms of the delivery, creativity and innovation in designing your courses to make it more interesting and attractive for the students or the learners to be more engaged is also one of the factors, and that actually attract the students to complete the courses. So. But again, technology is for me, technology is a tool, and to enhance learning and come back to the author, to the educator themselves to design that learning to be more meaningful, and I think all completing the course needs more efforts, and again come back to the quality assurance of the courses is very important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now turning to Rada Mohammed, and if your question is to one speaker particularly, please clarify. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the wonderful presentations. I just have a question. Well, I had two questions. One of them was addressed previously, so thank you so much, and I got the answer. So I just have one more question to Dr. Malik. Thank you, Dr. Malik, again for your presentation. And I think you mentioned in somewhere in your presentation that there has been an increased demand on the online learning and distance learning throughout the recent years. Now, I'm just wondering if there was like a directly proportional relationship between the demand of distance learning and face-to-face. So is the number of distance learning students increasing, and at the same time, the face-to-face learning increase as well? Because if yes, then this is a different interpretation. If the distance learning demand is increasing, but meanwhile, we have a decrease in the demand of the face-to-face, then that means that, yes, there is a kind of a trend that the new generation and new students are in favor of the distance learning and online learning.
Sorry.
The second question was addressed already, so yeah. Okay. So it was addressed previously. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I turn to two more participants for the questions, and we bundle a bit, and then maybe the speakers can also address them together. Next, I have Howden Morris on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me first commend both presenters for the very interesting presentations. Very good. I totally enjoyed them. My question was somewhat addressed, but I guess I need a little bit more clarification. And the question is in relation, and this is for both presenters, in relation to the quality assurance measures that are applied in online teaching learning. I would like to get an idea of what are the differences, what obtains as it relates to online versus face-to-face. Are there any pointers for institutions, persons delivering programs to at least employ to cross those quality assurance barriers? And I should mention I'm from the University of the West Indies in Jamaica.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more question from Mambi Keita. If you still have a question, yes, please speak out now. Otherwise, we will proceed. Okay. For now, we will go on, and I've turned first to Dr. Malik, since one question was addressed to you directly, and then there is one to yourself and to Professor Breen.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Arnold. So the question is that, is the demand for distance programs increasing, as well as the demand for conventional programs increasing, and is it the same at the same rate? So in fact, in India, the demand for ODL has been increasing, and the demand for conventional has been increasing. But if you see that the ODL is just 11% of the total enrollment, because the enrollment is 37.4, and if you see the ODL is just around 3 million, so it's about 11%. So while it's increasing, it is not at the it's not yet reached the same in terms of levels, but in terms of rates, yes, it is increasing at a fairly high rate. And I'm sure with the COVID pandemic, if we get the recent figures in, it would be a lot. And the second question is about quality assurance mechanisms. Yes, the quality assurance is the same for open universities as well as the regular universities. In terms of the open universities and regular universities, according to the latest UGC regulations of 2020, you have to have a score of 3.26 or higher out of 4 on the NAAC grading scale in order to have the open and online programs. And if you have 3.01 to 3.26 on the grading scale, then you actually can have it, but you have to apply to the UGC, so you have to get prior approval. So that is as far as the quality assurance mechanisms are concerned. So the quality assurance mechanisms do exist, but there is a grading in that term. And I'll also invite Professor Anand Lakshmi if she wants to add to both these questions.
No, Garima, I completely agree. I probably will have to use the same words to answer.
Okay, thank you. In this case, I hand over to Professor Breen.
Yes, just a quick word about enrollments. I think it is interesting to note that Open University student enrollments have declined very substantially over about the last 5 years. You know, getting near to half what they had been at one stage. And I think there are perhaps two main reasons for that. One was the introduction of student fees by the government, so that people basically have to pay for their higher education, but also just the general expansion of the system. When the Open University was created, fewer than 10% of people went into higher education after they'd left school. Whereas today in Britain, it's about 50% going to school. So in fact, the Open University's traditional market of adult people who, for some reason, never went to higher education at an earlier stage, is much, much reduced. You know, so they've already got their degrees, so they don't need to go to the Open University to get one. Now, coming back to the broader issue of quality assurance, I think this is a very important issue. I would agree with comments that in some cases there is a bit of skepticism about the quality of learning experiences in from online learning, although I don't think there is a lot of evidence particularly to support that. And indeed, I've also sort of heard arguments the opposite way, which actually would say that since online teaching and learning is generally more visible, you know, and people can see it, whether it's any good, whereas compared with the lecturer, you know, in behind closed doors that nobody sees other than the individual students, in some respects, online teaching is easier to assess. But I think the other thing that I would say, though, that I think we've got to remember there are a lot of separate issues or a lot of different features of quality assurance, and I don't think they work in quite the same way. So I think we can distinguish, you know, between, if you like, the content of the that is being presented, how well it is being presented, but then perhaps, and I think this may be the most important thing, coming back down to the credentials. How is student learning assessed? You know, and particularly if the education of the learner has taken place at different universities, some workplace learning and so on, to effectively ensure the quality of the qualification that has been given at the end. And are different qualifications which should be equivalent, are they regarded as being equivalent? And where is the evidence for it one way or another? So again, I would come back to my earlier point that I think this is to some extent within the category of things that we don't really know at the moment. Okay,
thank you very much. Time is progressing. I'm looking at the organizers and see if they give us 5 more minutes. I hope that Michaela is nodding.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Very good. Okay. Let's do this. So I see that many of the questions in the chat were also, there were direct responses in the chat, and there was some back and forth, and on many occasions it was, we should discuss this more. So this is a response to the organizers. But Michaela, I ask you, are there questions which we didn't address yet, and maybe a prominent question which you feel we should address in a few remaining minutes?
Yeah, thank you very much, Nina. So there were quite a number of interesting questions in both chats. I think the question of recognition was very prominent, and there was a question directly to Garima from John Oshira, who asks, what is the Indian government doing to ensure online learning qualifications and that it is recognized and accepted globally? And a related question to John, what is the recognition of MOOCs provided by FutureLearn in British universities? And I think another very interesting question also, what is the articulation between face-to-face and online learning? Is it so that you can move between the two, both ways, or are there restrictions? I know that Anna has something interesting to say about this.
Okay.
So I pass it to you, Nina.
Yes. I first hand over to Dr. Malik again.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Anand. Yes, I'll answer the first one, and the second one I'll pass on to Professor Annalakshmi. So the first one is about online learning qualifications to be recognized globally. So basically, yes, the government has allowed that you can have online degree programs, But in terms of the actual recognition, like I said, the quality assurance mechanism for online programs is the same as for regular programs, and you cannot actually start an online program unless you have accreditation. So you have to have accreditation 3.26 or higher in order to have online programs. And as far as the online courses are concerned, though I think the question was about degree programs, so as far as online courses are concerned, you can now have up to 40% courses from the SWAYAM platform as a part of your degree. So that is there. But in terms of recognition globally, yes, I mean, it is a quality assurance mechanism which would give a direction, or which would give a signaling mechanism. And for the second question, I'll give it to Professor Anna Lakshmi to talk about the articulation between face-to-face and online or distance learning.
Yeah. So I think the question that Michaela just said was the articulation between the face-to-face mode and the distance mode, the movement from one to the other. What's interesting is a student from regular mode or conventional mode can move to distance mode, after he or she completes part of the program. That is, possible because they are working on a credit-based system, and then they can carry the credits from the regular mode, the conventional mode, to the distance mode or the correspondence mode or open education mode. However, the reverse is not possible. So somebody who starts his or her education on distance mode is not on choice-based credit system. So they will not be eligible to move to the regular mode or conventional mode after finishing a part of the program. So if you start with the distance mode, you have to finish with the distance mode. However, if you start on the regular mode, you have a choice to continue this way or to move to the other. And I think the entire movement from one mode to the other is going to be more flexible and easy eventually, because they are, when I say they, the government of India is now trying to bring both the systems on par. And have credit-based system in distance mode as well. So once that gets implemented, then I think the movement will be on both ways. It would be possible. But as on date, it's only one way.
Thank you very much. So we have flexible pathways, but we also have path dependencies. Professor Breen, a final word on this from your side?
Yes, certainly. I mean, in some senses, this would again fall into my category of things that we don't know. But to some extent, I would say that within the UK system, there, in terms of movement between institutions, there's quite a bit of evidence that it's quite limited, and this partly reflects the market-based system that universities are reluctant to lose their customers, but in moving on to another institution, and that was something that came out of the UK project. The other aspect, though, would be the kind of hierarchies and stratification of the system. And I don't particularly see that the limitation is to do with online learning specifically. It is more to do with the status of the institution that you have been studying at. But the other thing, and this comes in to me an interesting question that I don't actually have the answer to, is whether with FutureLearn, and I mean it's got about 100 universities part of it, about 30 of them in the UK. And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this question, but I do think it is an interesting one, which is how far if the different institutions are linked into FutureLearn, is it easier for students to move between institutions? You know, that if you can get the credentials from different institutions and move around the system where you are, if you like, you're a member of FutureLearn, does that potentially give you access to a large number of different institutions to construct your education from? And that to me is an interesting question, which I will try to discover the answer from FutureLearn, but I'm afraid I don't have it at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we could go on for quite some time, but we are running out of time. We had a very interesting discussion. I would like to thank all the speakers, our excellent discussant, and all the participants for a very lively and interesting session. I prepared elaborate conclusions, which I will not be able to present, but just to link us back to the beginning, it all started from an observation that this is about empowering students. And as such, it is, of course, also about questions of equity. And maybe this could be a good topic for a new joint project and joint discussion, to what extent technology and flexible pathways help us to address equity issues, but to what extent they might also create new equity issues we need to deal with in future. I'm going to close on this note. Thanks again to all of you, especially to Dr. Malik, Professor Breen, and Dr. Suhaines, as well as to the organizers. And it is also my duty to announce that there's a coffee break now, and that the next session is going to be at 2:10 European time, which is in 7 minutes. So this is going to be a quick coffee. Thank you and have a very good day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
will start very soon, in just 1 minute.
I think we are ready to start. My name is Francisco Marmolejo. I serve as president of higher education at Qatar Foundation, and it is my distinct privilege to serve as moderator on the last session of today, in which I think we will have a unique opportunity to discuss about flexibility, but using another element which is significantly important, which is credit transfers and bridges. All of us know that one of the big challenges that we face in education has to do precisely with the limited connectivity, the limited articulation, the limited engagement between the different levels of institutions within and outside of our educational systems. And one of the significant means to achieve that is precisely with an exchange tool, which is precisely credit transfer, and also with a connecting of bridges or establishing bridges between those different levels of the system and different types of institutions. So so this is the topic that we are going to be discussing today at this panel. And just to start now, I would like to ask Uliana Furiv, before I proceed in making further presentations of the panelists, to provide us an international overview. And then we can have the participations from a very distinguished set of panelists. Uliana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francisco, and welcome back again, dear participants, to panel 3 on flexibility through credit and bridges, and specifically my presentation on the international perspective on diverse progression pathways. So in our research at IIEP, in addition to flexible entry, we also looked at flexibility during studies. While there's a lot of divergence between countries and higher education institutions regarding flexibility in the organization of their programs, it typically takes the form of integration of technology into regular programs to deliver ODL and MOOCs, as we discussed before, but also flexibility in the pace of study through part-time, evening, holiday season programs, and also flexibility in the curriculum through multidisciplinary programs, specializations, cross-studies, and more. In the previous panel, we have looked already at the role of technology to enhance the flexible delivery of studies. But in this presentation, I intend to discuss which diverse progression pathways through higher education are available worldwide in addition to ODL. I will provide examples from our case countries on transfer programs, credit accumulation and transfer systems. I will also examine how the flexibility in the pace of study and flexibility in the organization of the curriculum can support the progression of learners. I will finish my presentation again with some main issue points. So let me shortly explain what we mean by diverse progression pathways. So these are pathways enabled by policies at the national level and by institutional practices that allow learners to progress seamlessly between programs, disciplines, or institutions within the higher education sector. From our international survey, we learned that opportunities for students to transfer or articulate across similar fields of study are overall more common among the surveyed countries than across different fields of study. In systems that do apply cross-disciplinary transfers, they take place more frequently within the same institution than across institutions, and are more commonly supported by national regulations and national credit transfer systems. So transfer policies were found to facilitate the flexible progression of learners the most frequently. Transfers in the case countries are understood as a seamless transfer of students across programs, disciplines, and institutions. So the study countries have either national systems of transfer or transfers based on agreements between higher education institutions and their programs. As an example, in Finland, there is a well-developed system for national transfer of students. The country has a highly competitive admission system in which both first-time and second-time applicants compete. So the transfer is organized to lift the pressure from the admission system so that students who are already in the system do not have to reapply again if they are not satisfied with the higher education place that was allocated to them. Morocco has a similar system about which we will hear in this panel in the presentation by Bashir Kulani on bridges. So credit accumulation and transfer systems is an essential tool for implementing transfer and also recognition of prior learning at the institutional level. It can support recognition and transfer of learning obtained in formal, informal, or non-formal settings. In the case countries, credit transfers support the transfer of students from one program to another or across institutions. Credit transfer across the study countries takes place at the national but also institutional levels, as I mentioned before. At the institutional level, Jamaica has an advanced model of credit transfer called 2+2 model, which allows students to complete the first 2 years of a bachelor's program, gaining 60 credits, and be awarded an associate degree within a community college. Students can choose to transfer these credits to continue their degree studies for 2 more years at the university level to obtain a full bachelor's degree, or leave after 2 years with an associate degree and access the labor market, for example. However, it is important to know that there are often limitations on how many credits can be transferred across the higher education institutions or study programs. Also, a match between content and learning outcome can be the main requirement. So, flexibility in the pace of study means that students can choose to combine their studies and work. It is normally facilitated through part-time, evening, weekend, holiday season, or other types of provision, as opposed to full-time, full-day study. In the UK, part-time provision is well developed throughout the post-secondary sector, with actually 24% of students studying part-time and completing a bachelor's degree in 4 to 6 years. This flexibility enables students to cover their tuition fees while working. In Chile, as an example, 23% of students are enrolled in full-time evening studies, while some 70% are enrolled in the traditional learning mode, daytime and full-time. I have to emphasize that this data reflects pre-pandemic time. The remaining 7% are also enrolled in distance education programs, part-time studies, and other programs. And the evening studies pathway is preferred by adult learners or learners with caring responsibilities mainly. So flexibility in the organization of curriculum can also ensure that learning suits students' needs and pathways. It is usually organized at the level of individual institutions via, for example, elective courses, cross-institutional departmental exchanges, or joint degrees. In India, as was mentioned by Anna in the previous panel, there's a so-called system, the choice-based credit system, which was introduced in 2015 to promote more interdisciplinary approaches and offer more flexibility in course choices. So the University Grants Commission in India has published guidelines for the implementation of the system in central, state, and deemed universities. The system basically enables students to select from the prescribed list of core, elective, or minor and soft skill courses. Types and sequencing of courses are flexible, making curricula more interdisciplinary. But of course, there are barriers that Anna has already alluded to. In the UK, the University of Birmingham created a 4-year degree in the liberal arts and natural sciences to provide flexibility in the curriculum with interdisciplinary combinations in a year abroad. So the responsibility of the curriculum content is basically transferred to the student, who can tailor it to the needs and interests by choosing modules across the university according to their major or joint major. They also can choose a learning entrepreneurial skills option during the last year. So information and guidance services, as was mentioned many times, play a crucial role in flexible progression as well. The findings from our international survey suggest that information and guidance services are delivered most commonly at the level of higher education institutions rather than at the level of systems. So overall, 57 countries indicated that such services are provided in-house by higher education institutions, generally through guidance and counseling offices or similar entities. In some cases, central services that are involved in student recruitment are also the ones that offer information and guidance to students. In Finland, there is a system called personal study planning. It exists at all Finnish universities to guide students through their studies and help them choose between learning pathways. So a personal study plan, or PSP, can be designed by a student and their advisor to meet students' needs, objectives, and study options. So PSP is an electronic document that outlines the study progress of students, time to complete a degree, and different ways to complete it. PSPs are a good practice at the case higher education institutions in Finland that helps to guide students through their study and career options. Students are assigned a study advisor. They can benefit from discussions with this advisor during their bachelor or master studies. PSPs have been also important for realizing the cross-studies possibilities at the universities and universities of applied sciences in Finland. So cross-studies enlarge the curricular choices of students as they take courses from different institutions. But to do that, students need guidance to understand what courses would be best suited for their preferred study pathways. This makes PSPs even more necessary, and guidance as a whole. So to conclude today's presentation, I would like to again emphasize on the following main points. So first, the transfer policies are great for facilitating flexibility during studies, as they open opportunities for learners for their reorientation and therefore increase chances to succeed in higher education. Second, credit transfer system can support flexible transfers and recognition of prior learning. However, they require well-elaborated learning outcomes. Third, higher education institutions should deliver study programs with broad curricular options, in particular at the early study stage of learners. Such flexibility encourages learners to shape their study pathways according to their needs. The same goes for encouraging and implementing flexibility in the pace of study and in the degree programs. Last but not least, receiving guidance while benefiting from flexibility during progression can help students to move to higher levels of education and attain better outcomes. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation and pass it to Francisco to start off our exciting panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Juliana. What you already have provided is extremely interesting. Sort of the findings of the analysis being made give us a very good sense of what countries are doing, what are the significant limitations, and of course, it is just an initial perspective. You know, countries may claim that they have mechanisms placed. The challenge is how efficient are those mechanisms, how user-friendly are, and how many times institutions or even systems have some other barriers for that possibility of flexibility on this discussion. So to begin this, I think it is going to be very interesting to listen to perspectives at the country level. And in order to do that, I will start by asking Dawn Barrett-Adams, who is an accreditation officer at the University Council of Jamaica, to provide us with her perspective on the integration of Tibet and higher education in the specific case of Jamaica. Dawn, the floor is yours. I think your line is muted. Dawn, your line is muted.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. All right. Well, good morning from Jamaica, beautiful island of Jamaica. It is a pleasure to be here this morning to share with you. Before I begin, I would like to, on behalf of Dr. Caroline Hale, the consultant on this project, to extend gratitude to IIEP-UNESCO for selecting Jamaica to participate in this global study and the support provided throughout by Dr. Michaela Martin and Ms. Juliana Fury. We also extend gratitude to the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in Jamaica and the University Council of Jamaica for the support provided to the research team. This project is timely as Jamaica pursues its strategic goals for higher education of 1, developing alternative pathways into higher education, 2, increasing enrollment in higher education and having at least 80% of the eligible cohort completing a higher education degree, expanding access to training, certification, and employment, and also optimizing existing resources for workforce development. These goals form part of the education agenda and the Vision 2030 Jamaica National Development Plan, and are in keeping with Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which is quality education, which has as one of its targets increased access to equitable and quality technical, vocational, and tertiary education, including university. This research sought to evaluate the national policies and regulatory framework, as well as the national instruments to support the integration of TVET into our higher education sector and how these inform the practices in the higher education institution. Just to say that this was one component of the project. Interviews were conducted at 7 national bodies and 3 tertiary level institutions, covering a public college, a public university, and a private university. And so today we will share with you the findings in relation to credit transfer, the career advancement program, our occupational associate degree programs, and of course, the lessons learned and areas for improvement. The semblance of higher education in Jamaica can be traced back to 1838, and the transformation shows 4 distinct stages of development, with the sector burgeoning in the last 2 stages. A number of councils and committees were commissioned in the last 4 decades as part of the reform of the sector, such as the Commission on Education Transformation, which was commissioned in 2020, as well as higher education consultations, which were held in 2018 and culminated in a summit in 2018. There are 3 regulations or legislation for higher education in Jamaica. The HEART, Employment and Resource Training, called the HEART Trust, was established for the financing of skills training for employment in Jamaica. The amendment in 1991 facilitated the establishment of the National Council for Technical and Vocational Education and Training, which set standards for TVET and accredited TVET programs. Now, equity is addressed through the funding provided by HEART Trust. We also have the education of 1965, which makes provisions for equality in higher education. And then the University Council of Jamaica, which is the National External Quality Assurance Agency for Jamaica. This, through our accreditation process, we promote equity because our evaluation process is mission directed, and therefore no two institutions can be compared. Of course, support is provided from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security through the Program for Advancement to Health and Education, and this was launched in 2000, and it provides funding for equity, targeting or solely for persons from the lower quintile of the population, as well as persons for disabilities to participate in higher education. Now, our instrument, the National Instrument for Flexible Learning Pathways for Higher Education, is our National Qualifications Framework of Jamaica. This was launched in 2017. It is a comprehensive instrument and contains all types of qualifications offered in Jamaica and the levels of qualifications. As you can see, it spans the TVET, the occupational degrees, and the normal academic programs. It shows the various entry-exit points and the recognition of prior learning, which is used to enable the different multiple exit entry points into higher education. Now, this instrument is very versatile and can be used by institutions and students to leverage flexibility in pathways to access and participate in higher education. It can be used by employers to leverage employment based on required knowledge and competencies for specific job posts and levels of responsibilities. And it can be used by the government to leverage funding for human capital based on national priorities. Now, we're looking at the dual sector institutions, and really this shows options for study in higher education. So students can pursue post-secondary as well as start associate degree program in grades 12 and 13. They can go to universities or the university colleges as well as the normal colleges. And these provide the various levels of programs that students can pursue. Of course, there are pre-college programs that are offered by the universities. Now, just to say a little bit on our credit transfer system, and it allows for seamless articulation through higher education based on credits gained from previous educational experiences into another level or type of program. One example, as was indicated by Juliana, is our 2+2 model, where students may complete 2 years for an associate degree and either exit into work for a period, then re-enter into higher education for 2 additional years, for the bachelor's degree, or students may complete their associate degree, go into the workplace, and simultaneously pursue the additional 2 years on a part-time basis towards attaining their bachelor's degree. Students can also study at a college. We have community colleges, and then they can now transfer their credits into a university program. So some persons aspire to go to universities, although colleges in Jamaica do offer bachelor level programs. This redounds to cost savings in completing a higher education degree. Now, our career advancement program, this is a program which was launched in 2010, and it was used to implement grades 12 and 13 in the non-traditional high school, which provided only 5 years of secondary level education. Just to say that our education system was modeled off the British system. And when the secondary schools were implemented, the poor performing students from the primary system were placed into these institutions, and they would do skills-based kind of programs, largely. Now, this program was launched by our current Prime Minister, who was the Minister of Education back then, and he was concerned with the large number of dropouts in the non-traditional high schools. So students were not completing. So CAP, which was introduced, forms part of the compulsory education policy, which makes education compulsory for persons between ages 3 and 18, and provides for learning that is appropriate to that student. So we talk about flexibility in the pace at which learners learn. Students pursue the TVET certifications, which are skills-based, as post-secondary education or pre-college programs. Now, CAP has leveled the playing field for all students and brought equity to a system which previously was characterized by, I may say, elitism, which disguised equality. Because we had the top performing students in the primary exit program being placed in the traditional high school, and as I said earlier, the weaker students in the this non-traditional high school. So now the students can spend 7 years in any high schools in Jamaica, whether non-traditional or traditional, and they have options for study, which prepare them for future study or further education or to transition into the workplace. Now, the occupational associate degrees, these were launched in 2016 and provide for students with TVET certifications to enter into higher education. So students are now able to seamlessly transition into higher education based on their TVET certifications. The admission requirements, again, is National Vocational Qualifications, levels 1, 2, and 3. And these are offered in tertiary institutions and creating what we call a dual sector institutions. So at the higher education level, we now have dual sector institutions offering both TVET type higher education as well as academic type higher education programs. And so just to mention too that the occupational associate degree addresses equity through the provision of scholarships. Now, just to hear from the experiences of our students, and as you can see, students were substantiate the awareness and practice of the 2+2 models in our higher education sector in Jamaica. The students were aware of and they utilize the system, which makes for a fully integrated higher education sector. And so you're seeing there the responses of the students, which were collected at the 3 institutions that we conducted our interviews. Now, just to say too that equity and especially the CAP program has increased the availability of TVET in higher education institutions and access to higher education. And maybe I should also extend that to the occupational associate degree. So both programs, the CAP and OAD, have actually enabled increased access into higher education. Now, the 7 years in the secondary system allows students to study at a pace that matches their learning development. The emphasis on skills and practical activities were highlighted by the students, and this is what makes the CAP and the occupational associate degree attractive to them. A component of the project included the participation of disadvantaged persons in higher education. And based on the interviews, the programs enabled the participation of disadvantaged students based on the cost for higher education. So the tuition-free component of the CAP program, as well as the occupational associate degree, enabled those who would not normally be able to afford higher education to participate, as well as the program for advancement in health and education, which provides funding for individuals who are members of family in the lower quintile of the population. So equity has been addressed through PATH, as well as the occupational associate degrees, as well as scholarships. Just to say too, that CAP is funded by the government, and so that is a form of equity. And previously, CAP was under HEART, which provided funding and continues to provide the funding for the CAP program, although the CAP program has now been transitioned or transferred over to the Ministry of Education. In terms of the lessons learned, the research team posits that this study has been pivotal to Jamaica achieving its goal of Jamaicans empowered to achieve their fullest potential through a world-class education and training system. The credit transfer system, CAP, and the OADs have increased access to and participation in higher education, and it allows each individual to map and pursue a learning pathway that meets his or her developmental needs. In the alignment of the CAP and OADs to the NQF, just to say that they are aligned to the NQFJ and they promote the recognition and acceptance of TVET for entry into and participation in higher education. It has removed restricted access to the scholarships and free tuition for the program. The PATH program has also increased the participation of disadvantaged persons based on their socioeconomic factors in higher education. And so we have equity being addressed from that perspective. Integration is being facilitated through what can be termed as dual sector higher education institutions that offer both academic type and TVET programs. The NQF is the instrument for equity, inclusion, and lifelong learning and create endless learning opportunities for Jamaicans. It encapsulates the levels and types of programs and qualifications, entry and re-entry points, prior learning based on experiential and educational experience, as well as numerous exit points into the labor market. And in closing, just in terms of opportunities for development, based on the research, we're seeing that further integration of TVET into the higher education institution is an opportunity for growth, and the acceptance as a flexible option and replacing the notion of a second chance alternative pathway, which is a stigma that was once attached to TVET type programs. The NQF, we believe, was not being used effectively or sufficiently by the higher education stakeholders, and that it should be used to leverage funding and align to the levels of expertise needed to drive national priorities. Also, the integration of TVET, which started out as a project, or should I say the CAP and the OAD, should be now mainstreamed into the normal program offerings within the higher education institutions and the secondary institutions that have grades 12 and 13. And just to say that recently, the Minister of Education announced that this is being done. There's also a need for greater cohesion between the ministries, and when we look at the funding as well too, that's an area for improvement. And with that, all of that said, just to say thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dawn. I think the very specific case that you share with us is very important because it gives us a very good sense of the fact that it is possible to implement things even despite some of the limitations that you already recognized and outlined. And I'm sure participants in the seminar may be interested in asking further questions. So I will encourage everybody to use the chat option in order to submit the respective questions that you might have for them, and also of course for the other panelists. So now it is the turn to introduce the presentation on bridges in the Moroccan higher education. And in order to do that, El Bashir Kulani, professor of Hassan II University of Casablanca and former director of higher education at the Ministry of Education in Morocco, will share with us the concrete experience of Morocco. So El Bashir, the floor is yours.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Attendez.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Bashir will make his remarks in French for the ones who want to use the interpretation device.
Ah non, 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 c'est beau. Hein? Attendez, je vais recommencer. Allô?
Hello, I'm going to start all over again. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you. I'm unable to share my screen. I'm sorry, but I can't share my screen.
I wonder, yeah.
Non plus.
I can't see it myself.
Please
Yeah,
do that. Thank you.
of course.
Merci.
Yes. Vous en prie. Okay, stop.
Thank you.
Sharing.
Thank you. M'entendez?
Can you hear me now?
You can start.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I do it in French.
Here we go. That's fine. Go ahead.
Ma présentation,
So,
si vous voulez,
my presentation,
est celle qui a été réalisée dans notre étude de cas.
this was actually the fruit of our case study with my colleague Mohammed Nabil Benchroun. Now, in this presentation,
Je vais, si vous voulez, indiquer
I'm going to
quels sont les objectifs de
talk
l'étude,
to you about the objectives of the study, the methodology that was used to perform this etude, and to identify what's happening in higher education establishments in Morocco. But before that, I really would like to give you a snapshot of the system while focusing on the fragmentation of the system in Morocco. Our objective is to understand the various practices and flexibility in the Moroccan institutions and also identify the effects of the bridge course policy that's been planned until 2030. The methodology that was used is as follows. So we, first of all, collected and analyzed data. We had interviews with national officers and heads of establishments. And we also had discussions with students, and these discussions were organized in the form of focus groups. Now, on this basis, we have identified a few things. First of all, our education system in Morocco, as I said, is rather fragmented. There are so many components of the system that are working in an independent way. So we've got universities, we also have private institutions, we also have training centers we also have vocational centers, and this table shows you the statistics and the numbers. So you've got more than 80% that are of students that are enrolled in universities in Morocco. Now, these universities are open universities. They have no restrictions, while the other institutions have restricted access. So if you cannot get to a restricted access establishment, you go to the university, the open university, and this is exactly the problem. The problems have actually crystallized onto this aspect over the years. Now, these establishments have high failure rates and dropout rates because the students perhaps are not that motivated because they really couldn't go to the establishments of their choice. And this is basically what we can notice when we look at the output of the system. Now, these establishments, the distinction between these establishments has increased. And there's also the aspect of funding, because each category of establishment receives its funding. And there's absolutely no collective or joint effort done by these establishments. So this has caused some kind of malfunctioning in the system. And this has basically also caused the drop in the quality of the training programs, the courses, and this has also led to a very high level of unemployment amongst the graduates. Now, in order to counter this trend and to rectify this dysfunctioning, in 2003, 2004, there was a legislation 0100, which means 2000. So this legislation was drafted, but it was only implemented in 2003, 2004. So this really, we wanted to really break down the silos in the system that existed. And we introduced the concept of what we call bridge courses. Now, these bridge courses basically are a very important component. And if you, first of all, want to better distribute these students, and if you also want to cater to the new needs of the students who are enrolling, and the needs of these students who are enrolling are quite different from the needs of the students, of the conventional, the traditional students. And so we're talking of a category of students here who want an education that's out of the campus. So these bridge courses are extremely valuable, and they have to be developed amongst the various components, the various sectors in the higher education. And we also need new modes of delivery, like part-time courses and remote or online courses. Now, we haven't got all the desired results due to the bridge courses, and the bridge courses were limited only to the as of the 5th semester. So you really have to do 4th semester before even requesting access to a bridge course. And the results are extremely dissatisfactory, and they do really not encourage students, entice students to request for bridge courses. So because the satisfaction rate is actually very, very low, and there are only very few students who actually want to go to and do a bridge course. It's subsequent to this, and also some of the provisions of this legislation 0100. Now, there is a new policy for bridge courses which is coming up. This has a perspective for 2015 and 2030, and this has actually there is another legislation that has required the breakdown of silos amongst establishments in order to facilitate bridge courses at all levels, not just as of the 5th semester, but also before, so right from the start of the semester. Now, it's the implementation of the provisions of this legislation, which is being done today. The ministers are working on it. There are certain measures in order to facilitate the implementation of this bridge course by basically giving a lot of importance to the establishments holding these bridge courses. So these bridge courses, again, cater to both traditional and non-traditional modes as well. And that's precisely the objective of bridge course. And there are certain instruments have been institutionalized, like orientation, reorientation, recognition, and validation of prior learning in various programs. And also the quality assurance mechanism was completely reviewed. And this was important. It was important to do so. It's basically to reinforce trust in the new modes of teaching. Next slide, please. Now, the adoption of certification by prior learning and the adoption of a new pedagogical architecture for academic programs is also something that has been brought about by the reform. So the 3 years bachelor's degree, the traditional 3 years bachelor degrees can be now be done in 4 years if a student can basically get some of the modules recognized, or and his you can also shorten the degree through prior learning, through the validation of prior learning. Now, this this new model will really ensure a better fit between various academic programs, and there's also going to be a change in the TVET institutions because the TVET institutions have created a new framework called Cité des métiers des compétences, the cities of trade and skills. And this basically includes common modules with conventional academic institutions and universities, creating thus the possibility of mobility between the TVET universities and the regular academic establishments. So these common modules are extremely important, and this is exactly where there is validation of prior experience. And thanks to this, we can actually build bridges between the two establishments, between the TVET and the university establishments, in order to enhance mobility. Next slide, please. Now, is this, no, this is not the last slide. The next slide, please. Now, in order to implement this new system in organizations, this new educational system, and also to put in place the bridge courses, we have basically identified certain levers by talking to heads of establishments and officers. So first of all, we need the commitment from the government that must oversee the reform until 2030, and in consultation with employers and with the various stakeholders of higher education. You also have all bodies from higher education establishments who really want to contribute to the flexibility of the system, and by developing these bridge courses.
Il y a quand même un certain nombre d'obstacles qu'il faut surmonter pour la mise en œuvre.
Next slide, we also have the rigidity of the higher education system and its fragmentation, and the fact that institutions are in their silos, and this has fueled a certain number of practices limiting institutional and individual cooperations. And the other important point is the time between the publication of the laws and the implementation of regulatory text for a practical implementation. And there is another obstacle which you have to overcome, which is the mobilization of the digital, which is not really widely developed. It would allow to process the information very quickly and to develop training sessions outside the campus. And there are not many corporations and companies working with the universities in this field and cooperating with the universities. And these are the obstacles that the system must overcome to move from an organizational rationale to a more flexible attitude. Thank you for your attention. I have just finished on time, says the speaker.
Thank you very much, Bashir, and thanks for making the time. I truly appreciate that. Very, very good to see the case of Morocco, and of course, the clear sort of clarification that you already made about the obstacles and of course the challenges associated with the proper implementation. And I'm sure that this will contribute to feed the conversation that we will have after when we have a chance to also consider the questions that audience is going to be having. So now, in order to provide as a discussant a sort of a perspective from another country, it's also great to have the participation of Patricia Martinez. She is a researcher at the Universidad Simón Bolívar in Colombia, former university rector, former Vice Minister of Higher Education, and of course the very interesting case of Colombia, as she reflects as well on the two concrete experiences being presented in Jamaica and Morocco. It is very important to listen to. So Patricia, please, the floor is yours. We would like to hear your perspectives.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. My greetings from the Colombian Caribbean. It is my pleasure to join IIEP's forum and take part in this panel on flexible pathways to higher education, and thank my distinguished colleagues and friends of the panel for sharing their experiences and insight.
There is a Patricia
around the efforts that are led by national, regional, and
there is a little bit of an echo problem in your microphone. I wonder if you can speak closer to the mic.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please continue.
Okay, thanks. As I was saying, I want to orient my contribution around the efforts that are led by national, regional, and institutional levels of governance in Colombia to develop adequate policies, regulatory frameworks, instruments, and practices that support frameworks for flexible learning pathways, focusing on Colombia's higher education, where we share many of the issues and challenges that were exposed by Dr. Barrett Adams and Dr. Kulani, but also of previous panels in terms of lifelong learning, articulation, and technology. To start then, let me share some introductory comments. Colombia has experienced a participatory, some would say a lengthy process to build its own national qualification system and allow the possibility of flexible pathways. It has taken more than 10 years efforts to build our own qualification system and allow the possibility to progress through higher education and across systems. 10 years to conceptualize, define the model of qualifications for Colombia, design the qualification routes, pilot the model in different sectors, and define a modern new regulatory framework. The OECD, in the evaluations of national education policies carried out for higher education in Colombia in the years 2011 and 2016, identified that the preparatory cycles, as an example of mobility, did not work as well as they should, given the differences between the level of graduation of technological programs and the standards of access to the level of professional education. The OECD identified that the progression to higher levels have been limited by the lack of a national qualification framework, a lack of credit transfer and collaboration agreements between different higher education institutions and vocational training institutions. And among the recommendations made by the OECD is the one that refers to a national qualification framework supplemented with a national credit transfer system that should be developed and implemented as a priority to promote student mobility and create pathways through the system. The OECD also recommended that Colombia look to international experiences to find effective models and ways to involve other stakeholders in defining the learning outcomes and designing our national qualification framework, especially private higher education institutions that have a greater commercial ties and companies. And it is also recommended to establish a national credit recognition center to advise and promote credit transfer. So after multiple efforts and after experimenting several diverse routes based on international models and best practices, Colombia has finally achieved agreements to overcome those issues, such as the size and complexity of the education sector. We are a country of more than 50 million people, a higher education system of more than 2.5 million students and more than 300,000 professors, a vocational training system of almost 500,000 more students nationwide. Another issue that was also posed by Morocco was a fragmented governance in education and training. We have several ministries and several legislations that are responsible for the whole human capital formation system. And besides having two ministries in charge, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Labor, there are multiple institutions that partake in education and training in Colombia that add to this complexity. 300 higher education institutions whose evaluation and surveillance depends on the Ministry of Education at the national level. More than 4,000 vocational training institutions nationwide that depend from the local and regional governments, and certification of competencies that depend from the Ministry of Labor. So another issue is the quality assurance that at present only 10% of vocational and training programs are quality certified. And of course, this is a special difficulty to generate confidence and be able to define common standards or a credit system that is accepted nationwide. And so the structuring of a qualification framework has had all these complexities. In the last decades, different stakeholders, both from the educational as well as from the economic sectors in the country, have sustained efforts and experimented diverse alternatives as the affirmative actions that have been implemented since our Constitution of 1991 for minority groups, victims of internal conflict, displaced population. We've had attempts to build a tertiary national education system and a national credit transfer system. We have conformed public-private partnerships between higher education institutions and diverse economic sectors. We have offered dual programs and diplomas between higher education institutions and with secondary schools. And we have also piloted some aspects of what would be the national qualification framework in some economic sectors. So the goal of finally achieving a national agreement despite all the previous description and characteristics of the system and public policy of a national qualification system has been established in our National Development Plan 2018-2022. And this, of course, has been accelerated by competitiveness, the inclusiveness agenda after the 2016 peace agreement signature with the FARC, the Sustainable Development Goals and Education Agenda 2030, and of course, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, digital transformation, and international mobility. So higher education institutions in Colombia are today more aware that either they change or they are changed. So the country is, as I was saying, very close to the approval of a modern regulatory framework that will integrate all subsystems of education and qualification. Flexibility is a must, and in Colombia we are aware and working to have our own national qualification framework. And while this is happening at the national levels, despite not having a national qualification framework totally approved, at the institutional level and at the territorial level, we have some icons of flexibility that have taken advantage of their institutional autonomy and capacity for networking and partnerships to envision integrated systems of education and training. And those are the cases of Uniminuto at the institutional level and the city of Bogota at the local level. The previous slide, please. So having said this, let me briefly show you how this Colombian new national qualification system is going to look like. The system is defined as a set of instruments, policies, processes, and institutional arrangements necessary for the effective recognition of lifelong learning, orienting educational and vocational training to the social needs and the labor markets. This is the overall frame to connect world of education with the world of work. And the governance of this complex system is under a collegiate interinstitutional governing body or committee conformed by representatives of the three ministries of education, Ministry of Labor, and the Ministry of Industry, Commerce, and Tourism, the National Learning Service, SENA, the National Department of Human Resources for Public Service, and the National Department of Planning. The model, as you can see in the slide, contains 6 subsystems. The first, the National Qualification Framework, which is like the heart of the whole system. The second is the Educational and Vocational Training Mobility that will promote the itineraries aligned with the National Qualification framework, and it is expected that this subsystem will allow the transit, recognition, accumulation, homologation, and equivalence of knowledge, skills, and competences, and also previous learning. And also, thirdly, the quality assurance subsystem, which is a non-negotiable dimension for the whole qualification system to work, especially to have these pathways between higher education institution and vocational training institutions. The fourth element is the information platform of the national qualification system. And fifth, the skills competency standardization system designed under international standards catalogs for levels 1 to 8 with several objectives of flexibility. And finally, the competency assessment and certification that are the pathways of long life certifications of reskilling and upskilling. So having said this, and while I was saying that the final actions are taken to approve this national policy of Colombia national qualification system, at the institutional level, there's this private nonprofit institution that together with the public open university, UNAD, is the biggest higher education institution in the country. Next slide, please. Uniminuto, has more than 100,000 students, offers 156 programs, 11 campuses in different regions with 67 sites. And at the institutional level, it has adopted a policy of flexibility with 7 pillars: individual learning paths, certification prior to higher education, diploma, including micro-credentials, the minor strategy articulated to postgraduate course offerings, diverse methodologies on campus and on and off campus for a hybrid and using virtual platform, drop on, drop off for students that cannot study in a sustained manner semester after semester or quarter after quarter. They can study one semester, have a leave one semester, then come back. Dual programs, combining learning environments for both in industry and classroom, and institutional policy of transfer and recognition of knowledge. At the local and territorial level, there's another very interesting example. Next slide, please. And it is the city of Bogota, the case of Bogota, an autonomous region that holds the character of a decentralized, a special district with a population of more than 8 million inhabitants. And as the capital city, Bogota recently created its own higher education agency. And together with the mayor's office, they have designed a new model of flexible pathways from access to graduation to employment to offer young and adult population an inclusive and flexible higher education system, combining many strategies of which we have seen in these panels, starting with identifying students' vocational profile, creating a higher education and a credit bank that are cumulative with multiple entries and re-entries and pathways, a very strong program of student support for orientation and counseling at a personal level, but also at the employability, skills, and entrepreneurship training. And this model has adopted their own qualification framework, levels 1 to 8, that hopefully will be integrated to the national one, promoted agreements between higher education institutions, training centers, city government, industry, and of course, all of this model has been stimulated by offering a large public financial support with private sector, and well, they expect to complete ambitious goals in a 4-year plan, more than 50,000 high school students that earn academic or vocational credit, 20,000 new graduates, 10,000 new jobs, and many other interesting aspects. So to conclude, yes, institutions, local and regional territories can agree on particular frameworks. All of the experiences and innovations presented have 3 common elements. It's necessary a basic policy regulatory framework, adequate financing, and a quality assurance esteem. I think Bogota and Uniminuto seem to have incorporated all of them, and hopefully soon the national regulatory framework of Colombia will do so too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and thanks to the 2 panelists for providing your respective perspectives. Very useful discussion. I think all of you have provided very concrete cases, and also, again, I think you have been very bold in sharing not only the obstacles, the challenges, but also, of course, the way forward for all these initiatives. So we have a little bit of time, not too much, unfortunately, for to entertain 1 or 2 questions from participants in the panel, participants in the seminar. So those which are eventually interested in asking a question, the only recommendation that I will make is just ask the question, so we can have a further conversation among all of us. So no full presentations, but more very concrete questions. So could you please raise your hand if anyone is interested in asking a question at this point? I'm trying to see if we have any volunteer who would like to ask a question. Otherwise, of course, Ishaila has been a collecting some of your reflections in the chat, and she can provide us with a summary of those reflections and also some specific questions that panelists and discussant may have. If we don't hear from anybody else, so Michaela, please, could you please share some of the questions from the chat?
Yeah, thank you very much, Francisco. So we have had two very interesting questions on the different chats. One question is about how, so we have heard that many countries have credit systems, they have a regulatory framework, but we have heard also in an earlier panel that higher education institutions do not always buy into this because they can be in competition with each other. Since they want to, there's also the student market and so on. So how can higher education institutions be incentivized to actually to accept credits from other higher education institutions of the same country? So we're not talking internationally, but at the national level.
Mm-hmm.
Can we have your reflections on this?
I think that's a great question. I'm sure that you can share many things on this. So who would like to volunteer? Dawn, Patricia, Bashir? Dawn, I think yeah, please.
Right,
and then after that, Patricia. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, just to say though that quality assurance and accreditation has worked for us because through that recognition, our students have been able to articulate to credit transfer into programs overseas. And actually it has enabled mobility and portability of the qualifications that are gained in Jamaica. And certainly we have a very good relationship. Well, I'm with the Quality Assurance Agency in Jamaica. And so certainly the employers, institutions come to us, they ask us for endorsement, etc. Just to ensure that the programs are quality assured. And based on that, we have accepted credits that are done by students who study in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if, in addition of the good connections, also what specific incentives eventually can be put in place. I wonder, Patricia or Bashir, if also you have any perspectives on this.
Thank you very much. I agree with Dr. Barrett Adams of the accreditation system and qualifications being a factor to incentivize the acceptance of credits from other institutions. And also the organization of networks. We have in Colombia regional university networks. And so they've had common projects. One of them has been to help each other in their different needs to achieve accreditation. And so in this path to work together to improve themselves, they have identified this possibility of acceptance of credits of one another.
Okay, Bashir.
Alors, nous n'avons pas encore le système de crédit.
We don't have this credit system yet. It will be implemented soon, but accreditation is what allowed the bridges and the gateways, because the accreditation of trainings takes into account the bridges for each training pathways with conditions, of course, and this accreditation allows to set up bridges. And now with the new reform, there are other tools that will be developed by the ministry. They're creating networks of institutions, etc. And all this, as well as the credit system, will facilitate the development and the extension of gateways and will allow for exchanges between the different institutions. Well, partitioning is a culture. When you are in an institute where the training path is partitioned, you think in the same way. you can also work on culture and improve culture through incentives, and you can do that also at the institutional level.
Very good.
And this, the intention is to make sure that this culture will be turned into a culture destroying the silos.
Yeah, that's, and you know what, I should add to all the perspectives that you already have provided, that of course, one has to do, as all of you indicated, accreditation is a key trigger. But also, I think we need to analyze that also from the perspective of not the incentive, but the incentives. You know, one factor, of course, important to mention, especially in arrangement of public and private institutions, has to do with the economics of that. You know, institutions at the end of the day, by accepting the credits from the other institution, are in a way missing the opportunity to, of course, the financial considerations associated with that. On the other side, it provokes some kind of cannibalism between institutions in trying to attract the students from the other institutions. And the reality, and I think all of you may agree with, is that in many countries, those mechanisms are set up in place. A significant work is done in making sure that the mechanism and all the regulations are in place. But at the end of the day, not too many students use that. And I think there might be also other reasons why that happens. You know, I remember very well the case of the United States with a transition between community college to university. The system is in place, but not too many students are taking advantage of. So there are other elements associated with that, which I'm sure that all of you have additional points to make about it. So, Michelle, any other question that you find relevant to trigger a further conversation among panelists?
Yeah.
But before, Michaela, if I may, because, you know, another incentive is really students have their own aspirations, and certainly with the 2+2 model in Jamaica, students, rather than having to go to the city, Kingston, where, you know, we have most of our universities, they actually complete the 2 years in the the rural areas. It is much cheaper, it's nearer home, so they don't have to worry about, you know, costs relating to accommodation, etc. And so this, you know, enable, you know, cost savings from their point of view. And what we have too are that the institutions work together as well too. So there's collaboration. And I just want to endorse what Patricia said in terms of the kind of networking, because institutions, while there is competitiveness, institutions collaborate, and, you know, students also want a different cultural experience. I mean, even within parishes or, you know, local areas, the different cultures, and students look at that as well too. So there's always also the international experience as well too. So, you know, these are innate motivation or, you know, incentives for students to want to do the credit transfer and to go around, and, you know, and they feel that they'll be more rounded and prepared for the workplace.
And I think that, Dawn, I appreciate you mentioned that, because I think also probably one of the challenges in making sure that more students benefit from that is precisely by sharing more real stories. I think similar to the anecdotes or the quotes that you were including in your presentation. I think there is a lot of work to be done in communicating properly about the fact that those mechanisms are in place, not only to students, but also to parents, but also to institutions, but even to employers. I think a significant further dissemination is needed, I guess, in order to have a good understanding of what is and what is not, you know, what we are talking about. So I see one of the attendees wanted to ask a question. Halden Morris, could you please, again, just my only invitation is to be as brief as possible.
Thanks very much, Prince. Yes, appreciate the opportunity to question. Let me commend the presenters. One question that comes to mind is the reduction of the stigma in TVET as we integrate across the higher education system. And probably we could have a little perspective on that from the presenters.
Yeah. That's a very good question. I think this is something fundamental to be addressed. So who would like to start with very concrete recommendations on how to reduce that stigma? Patricia.
I would say that the first aspect that has to be taken into account is the taking part of the certification external evaluation. So they can generate more confidence in the higher education institutions that have already accepted quality assurance and accreditation evaluation.
I see. Very good. That's very good. Dawn, please go ahead.
Yes, if I may, just to say that, you know, in Jamaica, we have two different agencies doing quality assurance. We have UCJ, we do academic programs, and we have the NCTVET that does the accreditation for TVET. Recently, you know, the government is moving towards having one entity doing the quality assurance and accreditation of all programs, TVET, the occupational degrees, as well as the normal academic program. So that's one way in which we're trying to work through that. Certainly, we recognize and we know that there needs to be bridging, you know, courses as persons move from a TVET to an academic type, and perhaps vice versa. Certainly, in one of the interviews, one of the deans indicated that yes, they do accept TVET, persons with TVET, and they'll give them course exemptions because they recognize the skill base, the strong skill base that the students come in with. Certainly at level 3 or level 4 on our NQA. But certainly another opportunity exists with the occupational degrees that were introduced. These are, you know, kind of academic type programs, and the CAP program has enabled the recognition of TVET as an option, as an alternative for going into higher education.
Interesting.
I don't know if Dr. Hale wants to add anything to that. Dr. Carolyn Hale?
I think her line is muted. Caroline?
Oh, yes, I'm muted. Good morning. I just want to point out that by removing the label of CAP, which is what the minister has said she's going to do, she's removing that label and just integrating it into the system. So what you do is just provide the options to the students, and they will naturally progress, and making sure that the quality assurance systems are in place to ensure that everybody comes out with the same level and same quality of qualifications.
Yeah.
So that's what you do, remove labels. Labels cause problems. Look at the system, make sure the system is of a high standard and drive it through. But public education is critical.
Yeah. You know, and I agree. You know, I think we need to have dignified system, dignified types of institutions in all levels. Otherwise, we have this unfortunate stigma of first and second class institutions. Bashir, yes. I see that you wanted to say something as well.
Oui, je voulais dire pour le Maroc, si vous voulez, il y avait.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that for Morocco, we have tutors for vocational training. But with the reform that will be ongoing until 2030, those two different departments will be under the responsibility of a single ministry. So they will be brought together under the leadership of one ministry. And then secondly, there is a lot of demand for interns, not for students, but for interns who already have 2 years of training before they go to university. But training is not always up to the requirement levels of universities. And this is a problem because we have 2 accreditation systems, one for professional training and one for academic training. And I think with the reform currently being implemented, the 2 will be brought together, the 2 types of training, so that there are also shared projects. Because Morocco wants all skills to be acquired, which will be
Very
useful
good.
for the marketplace. So training, work placements, to integrate both types of training.
Very good. That's interesting. Very interesting. Michaela, before I wonder if you wanted to also add a perspective, or you are sharing some additional questions. But I'd like to say that there are some specific questions. I think is a good number of people participating at the seminar, which are asking for sort of more granularity in the how-to. You know, how to do the credit transfer, how to design the system. And I wonder if, Michelle, you can, especially I saw two questions from El Salvador and Nicaragua. So I wonder if there is any way for those interested in learning more about the details, the mechanics, the granularity of the implementation and design, if there is any information that can be provided either from IIEP or from other sources to them. So, Michelle, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to follow up a little bit on the discussion that we have had on the integration between the TVET sector and the higher academic
Please
sector.
go ahead.
And so, because we have heard some experiences, and I think we all agree that there is that it is useful to have a seamless transfer of students between the two sectors, because it allows for increased equity, since we find a lot of students in the more disfavored students in the TVET sector. So moving up to the sector is something also that does a lot for equity. But the question is, do we have any prerequisites? Does anything need to change also in the traditional sectors? Do we need also a broader offer perhaps in the academic sector, or do we need broader, let's say, systems with that have a broader curriculum also in upper secondary education? So what are the prerequisites to have the seamless transfer so that students succeed? Because I think that's the issue here. And then I agree with you, there is this question on how to make credit transfer work in reality. I have seen it and I wanted to pose it, but before, I think it's this other question about what needs to change actually in the traditional sectors is also very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Caroline, you also wanted to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to say how this really came about was when we were at Hart, we were looking at putting in what we call workforce colleges, and so we had technical teams working community college and Hart, looking at the curricula and looking across the system to see what the equivalences were and where the link was. So the technical work has to be done to convince both sides that we are looking at apples and apples. And that's what we looked at when we did the work. Well, I didn't do it, I was just supervising, but one of the people who did it is on this chat, Karen Gale. She actually led the process in terms of looking at the technical details, and they discovered that the two things merge at the associate's degree. And as Dr. Barrett Adams points out, you would probably have to do some bridging. So you put in the system to allow for the bridging, for the seamless move over into the traditional stream. The point is to convince the traditional stream that there is no difference. And you do that by putting the technical people together. Once they realize that there is no difference, then they're fine.
Unfortunately, we are, as usual, running out of time. And I'm sure that there are many more questions and many more sort of reflections being shared by participants. I think this last part of the discussion is fascinating, is very important. I think all of us are struggling with internationally. And I'm fully convinced about the importance of building a culture of evidence. A significant way to reduce that type of stigmatization of the two levels, and also the lack of understanding of what is and what is not each of them, is related to the fact that many times we don't have right information, either of the performance of the graduates the labor market expectations, sort of the quality of the teachers, this unfortunate idea that, there are first and second class institutions. So there are many of those elements that are a reality in our institution. The only way to do that is by having adequate evidence and, of course, using that evidence to convince the ones who need to be convinced about it. So I would like to ask if, Michaela, if there is any final burden question or comment that you would like for a panelist to react to based on the different questions that we had. And of course, being said that, then we will ask the panelists to help us with the wrap-up comments. Michaela?
Yeah, I would like to create some articulation between the sessions now. And there is an interesting question asked by Marcelo Vitarelli, whom I greet because he's a former graduate of IIEP. How to work with micro-credentials in a context of the pathways presented in Jamaica, Morocco, and Colombia?
That's a very good question. So who would like to start with? And again, just make sure, be mindful of that we have only 4 minutes left in total. So for the 3 of you, not for each of you. So Dawn, do you like to start with?
I will. It is so interesting that we at the UCJ are beginning to put together, we actually put a committee together to look at the micro-credentials and certainly how students, with these micro-credentials can articulate into, the regular programs. We actually have a case, and we're using that as a case study where we accredited a short course. Certainly the matter of credits did not come up when we were looking at that short course. And so we're beginning to, we have pulled the team together, and I think Peter is on that team, Peter. We have, touched base with them to see how we can develop the guidelines and, enable and this kind of transfer and bridging between the micro-credentials and certainly the regular, whether TVET or academic type programs.
Excellent. Bashir, the turn is yours.
Pour nous, si vous voulez, les micro-certifications.
For micro-credentials, we already have that in some areas such as medicine. We have modules where you get a certificate which allows doctors to show that they have the required skills in any given domain. And also in lifelong learning or for specific modules can also be used to improve skills of someone who is on the labor market. In higher education, this is possible, but in secondary studies, Morocco carried out an experiment in the 1970s whereby students who had not received their baccalaureate, because normally you need the baccalaureate to enter higher education, and those without it could follow courses for a year to then be able to have access to university without having their baccalaureate.
I see.
This is something that was only set up in some establishments, but then there were so many demands that actually they did away with it. But this is something that maybe we should try again and develop.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bashir. And last but not least, Patricia, the last 1 minute for you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think that at the end, we have to take a stand for inclusive excellence in lifelong learning, focus on learning outcomes, and change our focus to have students at the center and have institutions adapt to the students and not vice versa. And if we do that, we will all be at the same page and work together.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much to all of you for your great reflections and also the kindness and candor with which you have shared perspectives from Morocco, Colombia, and Jamaica. I'm sure that it provides very good and very concrete case in point that can be used by participants as they are reflecting on ways in which those ideas can be implemented at their specific local level. I think there was a very interesting comment being made at the end that which I thought that it was very useful just to make a reference to from Greg, when she says, you know, we tend to talk about transfer from Tibet to higher education. What about the opposite way? Transfer from academic studies to Tibet. And I think, you know, that's where I think all of us need to speak, to think, and to sort of reflect on this, getting out of the conventionals. And I think that's what, at the end of the day, in this very unique and very complicated time in which we live, we have that luxury right now in challenging our traditional assumptions, our traditional dogmas about what is and what is not, what it should happen in higher education. If we don't do it now, probably we won't do it, you know, never. So, so thank you very much to the panelists and the discussant for your great contributions. And now it is my privilege to introduce Wan Fatma Suhara. She is the director of the Commonwealth Tertiary Education Facility in Malaysia, and she will help us with providing us with perspectives on the entire day. She's going to reflect on the conclusions of day 2 in helping us to summarize the different highlights of the day and, of course, the takeaways that for all of us. So thank you very much to all of you. And now, Wan Fatma, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Francisco, for introducing me. Greeting from CTEF Malaysia. Selamat petang, everyone. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank IIEP-UNESCO together with the CTEF USM teams led by Dr. Shaiful to make this event possible. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to make a closing remarks for today's event. I would like to thank all of our wonderful and knowledgeable speakers, moderators, and discussion that we have this evening, and also all of the participants that still with us until the end of today's program. I will say this is a very interesting day of discussion on the higher education phenomenon. Okay, it has been a mantra. Education is for all. Yeah, it's a global commitment to provide basic quality education for all of layer of society, from children to adults, so that no one will be left behind. But the most challenging part is how to deliver this new era of education system, how to ensure that the quality of education is at par, how to expand this lifelong learning and flexible education to be acceptable in all countries, and how to blend our current and future education with the technology improvement when the world is moving toward the industrial revolution, IR 4.0. And I think some of the question has been primarily answered by our respective speakers today. Okay, next. All right, taking the UN goal of SDG 4 on flexible learning pathway has been a motto for these forums. So the flexibility learning pathway is one of the solutions to open up more opportunity for every single people in the world to enter the higher education system offered around the globe. Okay, as highlighted by Prof. John Breen, providing long life learning has reached the near and also far learner internationally. And we have seen that the enrollment on the online course in the United Kingdom is mostly populated by female learners, and within the mid-range age between 26 to 45 years old. Obviously, this is the millennial generation. Yeah? And whereas in the context of India, the private sector also play an important role other than the government sector in delivering the online learning system. And also in India, they have seen increasing pattern on enrollment each year as presented by Dr. Garima Malik, and their national policy on education also support in promoting of the open and distant learning program and also online course development. Okay, same as in Malaysia, Malaysia also have many initiatives to support the implementation of open and flexible learning pathway through the FL programs, okay, through the open distant learning, MOOC, and also the micro-credential. In this sense, we take Malaysia as an example, not because I'm from Malaysia, but because Malaysia have displayed a good practice design that can be adopted and adapted by other countries. Other than India, they also have SWOYAM, and also from the UK, they have the FutureLearn as well. Okay, from the both panel in session 2, the most interesting issue to be tackled by all of us, including the policymaker, is the first one is the reachability and the infrastructure to deliver this flexible learning. The second one is the quality assurance of offered flexible learning programs. And the third one is the collaboration between countries to reduce any competition during offering the flexible learning as suggested by the Prof. John Breen. Okay, and perhaps this can be discussed during the workshop tomorrow. Okay, the next slide, please. All right, when we are talking about the flexible pathway in education, we always ask how flexible is flexible, okay? And a stronger flexible pathway and full working system must be created to ensure that all of the learners, all of the students can demonstrate proficiency and meet the graduation requirement, because this is the end result for the learners. In this sense, the equivalent in terms of contents, the assessment, including accreditation, same as the traditional learning system must be achieved. Flexible learning pathway in the context that refer to pathway that leads to the qualification based on the concept of recognition of prior learning, but not limited to the recognition of work experience. And this is actually still a new concept for most of the country. So we can open up more opportunity for people to learn. The diversity of learning system must be offered. An innovative and creative instrument to cater the different needs of people must be created as an alternative pathway to the higher education. As Malaysia herself has demand that the higher education must go in parallel with the demand for the higher skilled and knowledgeable workers. So Malaysia through MQA have designed the FLC, which is to obtain the credit transfer for courses in the program enrolled in higher education. And also the letters AppleQ and also Apple M by taking into account the micro-credential program as a credit transfer to enter the higher education. Okay, as presented by Dr. Don Barrett Adam in panel 3 session, Jamaica has accredited the occupational associate degree from TVET as an option path to the higher education, whereas they are looking for the equity on education system using NVQJ certification for the entrance to higher education and possibly of the credit transfer. This is a great move to allow more people to reach the higher education. To transfer of the learners between program within institution within the same country is not a really big issue due to the same understanding of the process, and it controlled by a very minimal organization, depends on the country. However, if we want to transfer between program across different countries, this might be an issue due to the different policies and priorities. As mentioned by Juliana, okay, the transfer is not yet a mainstream practice in most of the higher education, especially for TVET programs. But the case study by Morocco, mentioned by Prof. Al-Bashir Kolaini, okay, the Moroccan government is actually on the way to make this realization, and the action plan by Moroccan government also promote that the non-traditional teaching mode, including distant learning and life expectancy training, is in the way. And same as the Dr. Patricia Martinez from Colombia, she also had achieved agreement of the national qualification framework for the long life learning and also flexible pathway as well. Okay, to encourage the admission through this path, it is must have validation and recognition of acquisition of the programs. And I believe one of the program that the policymaker can look into is the flexible progression of credit transfer that may help more learners at the vocational and professional levels to enter the higher education and attain more valuable outcome for the learners themselves. Okay, I think the last slide. Okay, the question is, are we ready? Okay, from my side of view, okay, the generation is ready. Okay, the most important thing that we must realize to ensure that this SDG 4 flexible learning can be achieved is through the target groups. Okay, and this stage actually the generation Z that born in 1990s has entered the higher education phase, and this generation is actually the generation that received the first phase and grown up with digital technology and internet, and obviously more of this generation is more digitally literate. As an educator and policymaker in higher education, we must realize that 21st century system must be moved in line with this generation. Okay, today's learner or the students demanding the changing in education system where their ability to gather information and demand on a creative and innovative approach which is faster than us. And I believe there are baby boomers group in the baby boomers in this group, and most of you is X generation, whereas my level is millennial generation. So the generation Z is different, a little bit different than us. So we can no longer use a projector for teaching, but rather go for the new resources available today, such as interactive software, digital imaging, audio and video creation tools to fit this new age of learners. Okay, in terms of implementation of ODL, okay, the flexible education on ODL, MOOCs, micro-credential, professional credential via digital approaches, I believe this generation Z is more than ready to get into the system and adapt better. In addition, in the current COVID-19 situation has forced most of us to go into online learning systems, since face-to-face teaching is not an option at the current stage, and it almost like 2 years. And despite of this bad impact of COVID, I'm looking this as an opportunity to implement of this flexible education, as the acceptance of this style of learning is actually at the highest peak, and people from all generation is right now is in the process to master on using the technology. And furthermore, the development of 4IR technology in using the artificial intelligence, okay, the machine learning implementation can provide some of the solution for flexible learning. This is where and when the social science people meets the science people. Okay, but in our eagerness to reach and implement of SDG 4, the policymaker must also be focused on the equity, especially to the disadvantaged group. Yeah? We must understand the remote learning remains out of reach for at least 500 million students in the world, and the inequality of education mostly happen in low-income country. I would say, even though the student is living in urban environment, but there are still a group of urban poor that might also left behind during this transition. And tonight, before I end my closing remarks, I leave all of you to think how we can fill these gaps and how can we ensure that none of layer of society left behind in transition to the flexible education. And therefore, thank you and good evening. I hope to see you tomorrow in incoming workshop. And I pass back this session to Francisco. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you so much, Van Fatma. Excellent comments, very interesting takeaways from today, and also pushing it a little bit further, coming forward with what you think would need to be emphasized by policymakers in the future, and also relating the issues that we have discussed today to the Malaysian context. So thank you very much. I think we had the most interesting day today, two very important topics that were discussed today, technology and also credit transfer and the articulation between TVET and academic higher education. So that was really a big menu today. We are coming to the end of today's session. As you know, we continue tomorrow with our last day of this International Policy Forum. And we will start with addressing a very important question, I believe, which is really the importance of governance mechanisms and instruments to support flexibility. Because we all know that we can have governance systems that are either supportive or not so supportive. And so this will be the topic of the first session tomorrow morning. And then we will move it to the working groups, where you will have the opportunity in language groups for topics to discuss your national experiences and to exchange. So we are looking forward to that. And so stay connected. So this is the end of today's session, but we are looking forward to meeting you tomorrow morning or tomorrow afternoon at the same time. So can you put on your camera so that we can see you again? Would be very nice. So wishing you a good evening. Thank you so much.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good to see you.
Well, it's still morning. Morning to us, right?
Morning to us.
Early morning.
Good evening. Kindly put on the gallery view so that we can see each other. Can we also see our friends, the interpreters?
Thank you.
The people who make it all happen.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
We have some interpreters who are staying close to the sea.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
It was a great day.
See you tomorrow.
Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, and thanking everyone.
Later.